Chapter 8:10. Yi Qin's reincarnation immortal city was built with a god-level village creation token. It naturally had the ability to raise the aptitude of the territory's residents by 3 grades. If the royal army soldiers all became Yi Qin's subordinates, then the aptitude of these royal army soldiers would directly become at least SSS level. It was also because of this that Yi Qin had the thought that it was a complete waste for the royal army to follow Lu Hong when he noticed the aptitude of the royal army soldiers. Unfortunately, now is not the time. When the chaos of Dongda started, he would try to take the royal army away. Thinking of this, Yi Qin couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Then he smiled and nodded at the royal army team. At this moment, a young eunuch beside the luxurious carriage with 5 horses suddenly knelt on the ground with his hands on the ground. When Yi Qin saw this, he was instantly stunned. This was letting me step on his back and get on the carriage? Just as Yi Qin thought of this, the young eunuch who had followed Yi Qin to the main street came to Yi Qin's side with a smile. Then, he bowed to Yi Qin with incomparable flattery. "Lord, you of Beach, you can get on the carriage." When Yi Qin heard this, he glanced at the young eunuch beside the carriage who was being used as a human ladder. Then he smiled and nodded. In the next second, Yi Qin walked straight to the carriage. When he came to the side of the human ladder, Yi Qin stepped on it and got on the luxurious carriage. Yi Qin was a noble, and he was also the only king with a different surname in the Great Han Empire. Although it seemed very corrupt and somewhat inhumane to step on human flesh, Yi Qin didn't care at all. After all, it was the eunuch who was being used as a human ladder. Moreover, the human ladder was originally unique to this era. There was no such thing as suitable or not. Yi Qin was fine, but in the distance, the players who were attracted by the eunuch leading a large group of people to the inn were in an uproar. Damn, so this is the privilege of nobles. They're actually using people as ladders. Mother Fasters Kerr, I've only seen it in movies and TV dramas. I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes today. Hee hee, you of Beach is you of Beach. Look at this posture, look at this aura. Who learned it? It's a little inhumane. After all, the natives of this world can be brought to our world. They should be real people, not data. Cut out, human Tao. You're still talking about humanity at a time like this? Are you out of your mind? Or did he eat too many brain-damaging pills and become brain-damaged? Scram. Am I wrong? There's nothing much to say about killing people. After all, this world is already abnormal. But using people as ladders is an insult to their character and trampling on their dignity. Idiot, you're just like those idiots from Citigroup before the meteor fell. Every day, you're shouting about human rights and being anti-human. But behind our backs, you're engaging in prostitution. Why bother about this idiot? He's just an idiot with a hole in his head. Just as the players were discussing, the leader of the royal army, who was escorting Yi Qin, looked gloomy. Then, he looked at the noisy players and shouted, "You of Beach, you of Beach! How dare you speak ill of his majesty, you king?" As soon as the leader of the royal army finished his words, the royal army raised their spears in unison and charged towards the players who were discussing the trample. When the players saw this, they stopped and stared with their eyes wide open. At this moment, the same thought appeared in the minds of all the players who were discussing the matter. Gosh, what's the situation? Nobody said anything bad about Yi Qin. How did it agitate the royal army? The players were puzzled, and even at a loss because they didn't know the crux of the matter. To be precise, they were discussing the aristocrats. More importantly, the royal army, who escorted Yi Qin to the prince's consort's residence, were all indebted to Yi Qin. If it was a normal day, or if the royal army wasn't the ones escorting Yi Qin to the prince's consort's residence, the players would be scolded or imprisoned for a period of time. But the situation was different now. The royal army, who escorted Yi Qin to the prince's consort's residence, were indebted to Yi Qin for saving their lives. It could be said that this group of royal guards have been worrying about how to repay Yi Qin. Now, this group of players had given the royal guards a chance to repay Yi Qin. Although the royal guards were not repaying Lin Mingya by doing this, the leader of the royal guards would not care about this. To the leader of the royal army, as long as he could perform in front of Yi Qin and convey to Yi Qin that he wanted to repay his debt and work for Yi Qin, that would be enough. Yi Chun, who had just sat in the carriage, looked at the royal army, who was charging at the players, and raised his eyebrows. From the looks of it, subduing the royal army was easier than he had imagined. Yi Chun couldn't be blamed for thinking this way. After all, the royal army was Lu Hong's personal army. Their duty was to protect the capital and Emperor Lu Hong. Moreover, they were 100% loyal to Lu Hong. And now, the royal army was trying to get closer to Yi Chun. This was undoubtedly telling Yi Chun that the Great Han Empire's royal army was no longer united. In other words, the royal army's loyalty to Lu Hong had greatly decreased. Not bad, not bad. When the time comes, I'll take down the entire royal army. Thinking of this, Yi Chun couldn't help but smirk. Then, he pulled down the carriage curtains. Yi Chun didn't care whether the players who were discussing nobles or discussing Yi Chun were innocent or not. Even if Yi Chun could stop the royal army, Yi Chun wouldn't do so. This was because Yi Chun didn't care. This was also because Yi Chun was a noble. Moreover, he was the Prince Yu of Han, who was second only to one person and above everyone else. If Yi Chun stopped the royal army from killing for these players, then Yi Chun, a top noble of the Great Han Empire, would not only be looked down upon by other nobles, but he would also be talked about by the commoners. There was no other way. Hierarchy was the fixed order of this era. If commoners talked about nobles, they would be punished. This was an iron rule that no one could change. It was also because of this reason that Yi Chun couldn't be bothered with the lives of these players. Just as Yi Chun pulled down the curtains of the carriage, the sound of spears piercing through bodies, as well as the screams and curses of the players, could be heard. The young eunuch who followed Yi Chun to the main street didn't even look at the players being stabbed to death. He directly shouted, "Raise the palanquin." Chapter 8:11. As soon as the eunuch finished speaking, two young men at the front of the procession to welcome Yi Chun back to the prince consort's residence held a gong in their left hand and a mallet in their right hand. They were dressed like retainers. Duong, duong. After two sounds, the two young men straightened their necks in unison and then shouted in a loud voice, "Lord Yu of Beach has returned to the prince consort's residence. Everyone else, please leave." As soon as the two of them finished speaking, they strode forward. Behind them were a group of eunuchs holding up banners that read, "Retreat," and "Silence." Behind them were a group of imperial guards riding on fine horses. They held up banners that read, "Yu of Beach, General of Agile Cavalry, Governor of Yuzhou, Prince Consort," and, regardless of whether it was the former or the latter, they all lined up in pairs and headed toward the inner city of Luoyang in unison. Only when all of the eunuchs and palace guards had moved forward did the coachman pull on the reins. Then, he drove the luxurious carriage with Yi Chun in it and headed towards the inner city of Luoyang. The eunuch who came to inform Yi Chun that he could return to the prince consort's residence trotted beside the carriage and followed the procession toward the inner city of Luoyang. The procession to welcome Yi Chun back to the prince consort's residence was not very long, but it could not hide the luxury and nobility of the procession. When the people on the streets saw Yi Chun return to the prince consort's residence, they hurriedly retreated to the two sides of the street. Then, they respectfully bowed to the luxurious carriage that Yi Chun was in. As for the players, they all widened their eyes. Then, they showed expressions of shock and envy. It cannot be helped. Most people wanted to be the main character of such a big show-off. Unfortunately, they were not qualified and could only think about it in their hearts. Of course, envy and jealousy were just envy and jealousy. The players were still very rational. This time, no one dared to discuss it. No one dared to continue standing there. They hurriedly followed the crowd and bowed. There was nothing he could do about it. He had already learned his lesson. The players who had been talking about the nobles had all been killed by the ferocious royal guards. They did not want to test the sharpness of the royal guards' blades, just because they were unhappy. The procession slowly moved forward. Yi Chun, who was sitting in the luxurious carriage, looked at the various exquisite decorations in the carriage, and then closed his eyes to rest. Although it was Yi Chun's first time traveling in such a way, he didn't feel uncomfortable. Of course, Yi Chun would not be complacent because of this. After all, these were only mortal etiquettes. They were not on the same level as the emperor of the fated dynasty in the primeval world. There was nothing to be proud of. Time slowly passed, and Yi Chen's luxurious carriage finally came to a stop when it arrived at a huge mansion that occupied an area of 1 kilometer. At this moment, the young eunuch who had followed the luxurious carriage all the way here waved his right hand. The young eunuch who had been used as a stepping stone hurriedly came to the side of the carriage and knelt on the ground. After bending over, he directly placed his hands on the ground. When the young eunuch saw this, he gently lifted the curtain of the luxurious carriage and bowed obsequiously. "Lord Yu of Beach, we have arrived at the prince consort's residence." After the young eunuch finished speaking, he made a gesture of supporting the young eunuch. When Yi Chen saw this, he could not help but smile. Then, with the young eunuch's support, he stepped on the young eunuch's back and got off the carriage. Yi Chen glanced at the prince consort's residence, which had been completely renovated by Lu Hong from Heijin and supervised by Zhang Li overnight. He chuckled and nodded, and then said, "Good, good. Not bad, not bad. Secretary Zhang is too considerate. Lord Yu of Beach, your matters are Zhang Changshi's matters, and also our matters. How could Zhang Changshi not care?" When the young eunuch heard this, he immediately smiled obsequiously and then bowed. When Yi Chen heard this, his eyebrows involuntarily raised. He waved his right hand, and a purple gold brick made of purple gold instantly appeared. Then, Yi Chen threw it to the young eunuch. When the young eunuch who still wanted to support Yi Chen saw this, he was slightly stunned and then hastily reached out to catch it. In the next second, the young eunuch's face was filled with excitement as he bowed to Yi Chen and said, "Thank you, Lord Yu of Beach, for your reward." When Yi Chen heard this, he chuckled and nodded, and then said, "If you work for me, then I will reward you. You deserve to be rewarded for working for me. To be able to work for Lord Yu of Beach is this servant's good fortune. In the future, if Lord Yu of Beach has any errands, just give the order. Even if this servant has to climb a mountain of blades or dive into a sea of fire, this servant will do everything for Lord Yu of Beach beautifully." When the young eunuch heard this, he immediately beamed with joy. When Yi Chen heard this, he nodded in satisfaction and then headed straight for the prince consort's residence. Unexpectedly, the moment Yi Chen reached the entrance, a female voice filled with complex emotions suddenly sounded out. "Yu of Beach seems to be in a good mood." When Yi Chen heard this, he immediately frowned. The young eunuch following behind, Yi Chen immediately changed his expression. At this moment, a beautiful woman in a palace gown, followed by 2 pretty palace maids, walked over from the mansion next door. When Yi Chen turned around to look at the beautiful woman in the palace dress, the young eunuch following behind, Yi Chen suddenly bowed and said in a low voice, "Lord Yu of Beach, it's Empress He. She probably wants to persuade Yu of Beach not to go to the second prince." When Yi Chen heard this, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Then he directly looked at Empress He, who was walking towards him. Then he cupped his hands and greeted Empress He. "Yi Chen greets Empress Your Highness." As soon as Yi Chen finished speaking, Empress He came to Yi Chen with the 2 palace maids. After looking at Yi Chen for a while, Empress He suddenly smiled and nodded, saying, "Prince Consort Yi, why are you so happy? Can you tell me about it? I'm going to marry the 2 princesses tomorrow. Of course I'm happy from the bottom of my heart." When Yi Chen heard this, he smiled and said. When Empress He heard this, she glanced at Yi Chen and asked, "The prince consort's residence has just been built. I heard that Zhang Changshi spent a lot of money to build it. I wonder if I'm lucky enough to have a look at it? How dare I disobey your highness's order? Please come in." When Yi Chen heard this, he glanced at Empress He and said with a smile. After that, he extended his right hand toward the door of the prince consort's residence and made a gesture of inviting her in. When Empress He saw this, she immediately raised her right arm and covered her mouth with her sleeve. Then she chuckled softly and said, "In that case, I'm sorry to disturb you." Chapter 8:12. When Yi Chen heard this, he smiled lightly and said, "Please, Your Highness, Empress, he nodded and walked towards the prince consort's residence with the two palace maids. At this moment, Yi Chun took a glance at Empress He's back, then followed her to the prince consort's residence. The eunuch who welcomed Yi Chun back to the prince consort's residence hesitated for a moment. Then he caught up to Yi Chun and whispered to him in a voice that only Yi Chun could hear. "You Lord Beach, the great Han dynasty cannot have only one prince. At least not now. Please reconsider. Send my regards to Zhang Chongshi. I want to have a drink with Zhang Chongshi at the wedding banquet tomorrow." Yi Chun glanced at the eunuch and said. What the eunuch said just now was naturally to tell Yi Chun not to agree to Empress Yi's request of not looking for second Prince Lu Xie. Yi Chun understood what the eunuch was trying to say. Moreover, Yi Chun knew that what the eunuch said was the decision made by Zhang Li and the other eunuchs. The reason was simple. After the second prince of the Great Han Empire, Lu Xie, sneaked into the real world, there was only one prince left in the Great Han Empire, and that was Liu Bian. If they didn't find Lu Xie, then the successor to the throne of the Great Han Empire could only be Liu Bian. In that case, as Liu Bian's uncle, He Jin's authority would grow. Moreover, all the officials would lean towards He Jin. Under such circumstances, it wouldn't be easy for Zhang Li and the other eunuchs to deal with He Jin. Of course, the most important thing was that as time passed, Zhang Li and the other eunuchs would be in more danger. As for the reason, it was simple. He Jin hated eunuchs and wished that all of them were dead. If He Jin was given the chance, he would definitely make a move against Zhang Li and the other eunuchs. Moreover, he would kill them. Zhang Li and the other eunuchs did not want to see such a situation happen. It was also for this reason that Zhang Li and the other eunuchs hoped that Yi Chun could help them find the missing second prince Lu Xie. This way, the situation of Liu Bian being the only prince of the Great Han dynasty could be broken. As for Zhang Li and the other eunuchs, they had placed the important task of searching for second prince Lu Xie on Yi Chun. Yi Chun could also see the reason behind it. To be more precise, it was Zhang Li and the other senior eunuchs who had no idea what to do about the mysterious disappearance of the second prince of the Great Han Empire, Lu Xie, and had no choice but to ask Yi Chun for help. After all, the second prince, Lu Xie, had used the two-world stone to escape to the real world with the help of the Nangong clan. Under such circumstances, no matter how strong Zhang Li and the other eunuchs were, or how many subordinates they had, even if they searched the entire Great Han Empire, they would not be able to find the second prince Lu Xie who had gone to the real world. Thus, they could only ask for Yi Chun's help. After all, Yi Chun was synonymous with omnipotent in the Great Han Empire. Moreover, everyone knew that he was an ally of the eunuchs. Now that Zhang Li and the other eunuchs had encountered danger, and it was a danger that they could not solve, it would be strange if they did not ask for help from Yi Chun. It was also for this reason that when the eunuch who had brought Yi Chun back to the prince consort's residence saw that Emperor he had come to find Yi Chun, his expression changed greatly. He did not even care about etiquette and directly ran to Yi Chun's side and said to Yi Chun, "The Great Han cannot only have one prince." When Yi Chun's words fell, the eunuch was momentarily stunned. Then, with incomparable ecstasy, he bowed to Yi Chun and said, "Sir Yu of Beach, this servant will go back and pass on Yu of Beach's words to Zhang Chongshi." When the eunuch heard Yi Chun's words, he was at first a bit confused, but he immediately reacted. This was Yi Chun's definite answer. To be more precise, Yi Chun would not agree to Empress Yi's request of not going to find the second prince Lu Xie. In reality, this was also the case. No matter what Empress Yi used to make a deal with Yi Chun would not agree to Empress Yi's request of not going to find the Great Han Empire's second prince Lu Xie. It had to be known that Yi Chun had already taken Lu Xie as a slave. This time, when he returned to the game world, he was prepared to release Lu Xie and have him return to the palace to work. To be more precise, he wanted Lu Xie, who knew the trajectory of history and wanted to change his own fate, to summon back all the subordinates he sent to assassinate key historical figures such as Chao Ningfu, Dong De, and Yuan Shao. Then, he would give up on the assassination. Yi Chun did not want to see Lu Xie's plan succeed. then there would be a major change in the original course of history of the Three Kingdoms novice region. For example, Dong Da's rebellion and the struggle for hegemony. If these two key plotlines could not appear normally because of Lu Xie's assassination plan, or even never appear, then wouldn't Yi Qin's plan of gathering the heaven and earth's fate of the Three Kingdoms novice region be ruined? This was not the result Yi Qin wanted to see. It was also because of this reason that Yi Qin would not agree to Empress He's unreasonable request. After hearing the young eunuch's ecstatic words, Yi Qin chuckled and nodded. Then, he went straight to the prince consort's residence. The moment Yi Qin entered the prince consort's residence, the palace maids and eunuchs who had been waiting for a long time in the front courtyard bowed in unison. Greetings to the Empress. Long live the Empress. Long live the Empress. As soon as the palace maids and eunuchs finished speaking, they stood up and saw Yi Qin. Then their eyes lit up. In the next second, the palace maids and eunuchs all bowed to Yi Qin in unison and loudly said, "Greetings to you of Beech, Lord Beech." The palace maids and eunuchs had all heard of Yi Qin's legend. Now that they saw Yi Qin in person, the palace maids were happy from the bottom of their hearts. This was because from today onwards, they were Yi Qin's people. As for the eunuchs, they were happy because Yi Qin was an ally of the eunuchs. There was also the rumor that Yi Qin was very generous with his rewards. Empress He, who was originally quite happy, frowned when she heard that the palace maids and eunuchs of the prince consort's residence had completely different emotions. However, she quickly returned to normal and continued walking. Yi Qin, who didn't release his divine sense, but had extremely sharp senses, instantly sensed the change in Empress He's emotions. This woman's ability to hide her emotions was still not practiced to perfection. Thinking of this, Yi Qin couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Then, with a wave of his right hand, 2 chests of gold coins instantly appeared on the ground. After glancing at the 2 chests of gold coins on the ground, Yi Qin immediately looked at the palace maids and eunuchs who were stunned by the sight of the 2 chests of gold coins and said, "Tomorrow is this prince's wedding. All of you must do your best. Do not neglect any guest. Yes, you of Beech, Lord Beech." When the palace maids and eunuchs heard this, they immediately came back to their senses and hurriedly bowed. When Yi Qin heard this, he nodded and said, "Very good. This is this prince's reward for all of you. However, all of you must remember that if there is a mistake tomorrow, this prince's military rod will not be merciful. Yes, you of Beech, Lord Beech, your servants swear that there will not be any mistakes." When the palace maids and eunuchs heard this, their faces all turned pale. They hurriedly bowed and said loudly. Chapter 8:13. The palace maids and eunuchs of the prince consort residence naturally knew that as servants, they would be punished if they made a mistake. However, they had never imagined that Yi Qin, the master of the prince consort residence, would use the military rod as a punishment. How could the palace maids and eunuchs not know what a military rod was? 20 to 30 hits from this thing could cripple a person or even kill him directly. It was precisely because of this that the palace maids and eunuchs were so scared when they heard Yi Qin's punishment method. When Yi Qin heard the palace maids and eunuchs' fearful words, he nodded in satisfaction and said, "Very well. You must remember the promise you just made to this prince. Otherwise, don't blame this prince for being merciless." "Yes, Lord, you of Beech." When the palace maids and eunuchs heard this, they trembled once more and hastily bowed in respect. When Yi Qin heard this, he chuckled and nodded, then said, "Rewards are rewarded. If you make a mistake, you are punished. These 2 chests of gold coins are your reward in advance. Divide them among yourselves." When Yi Qin finished speaking, the palace maids and eunuchs all widened their eyes and hastily bowed. "Thank you, Lord you of Beech, for your reward." When the palace maids and eunuchs of the prince consort residence saw Yi Qin take out 2 chests of gold coins, they guessed that Yi Qin was going to reward them, but they didn't dare to be sure. After all, these were 2 chests of gold coins, not 2 chests of silver coins, and certainly not 2 chests of copper coins. If these 2 chests of gold coins were distributed to them, each of them would receive several dozen gold coins as a reward. Even if they worked hard in the imperial palace and didn't eat, drink, or spend money, they would still need 50 years to save up such a large reward. It was precisely because of this that the palace maids and eunuchs of the prince consort residence were all shocked when they heard Yi Chen's words of reward. Of course, after their shock, they were overjoyed. After all, Yi Chen's reward was simply too great. They couldn't help but be excited. When Yi Chen heard the excitement in the words of the palace maids and eunuchs, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Then he looked at Empress He, who suddenly stopped and asked, "Nyang Nyang, why did you stop?" As soon as Yi Chen arrived at the prince consort's manor, he specially rewarded the palace maids and eunuchs in the prince consort's manor. He even gave them such a big hand. In fact, it was intentional. To be more precise, Yi Chen did this to tell Empress He that Yi Chen placed a lot of importance on marrying the 2 princesses of the Great Han Empire tomorrow. Going deeper, Yi Chen placed great importance on becoming the emperor's son-in-law. At first glance, it seemed like Yi Chen's action was completely unnecessary. There was no need for that at all. But in fact, it was the complete opposite. Because what Yi Chen told Empress, he was happy to become the emperor's son-in-law. Once Yi Chen became the emperor's son-in-law, he would become a family with Lu Hong. With such an identity, Lu Xie, the second prince of the Great Han Empire, would become Yi Chen's brother-in-law. Now Lu Xie was mysteriously missing. As his brother-in-law, how could Yi Chen stand by and do nothing? This was Yi Chen's purpose of beating around the bush. To be more precise, Yi Chen wanted Empress He to understand his intention. And the reason why Yi Chen did this was that he didn't want to have any conflict with Empress He because of the second prince, Lu Xie. After all, Empress He was the mother of the country. If Yi Chen had any conflict with Empress He, this woman would definitely go to Lu Hong and whisper pillow talk. If Empress He really went to Lu Hong to take revenge on Yi Chen and whispered pillow talk, then Yi Chen's plan to seize all the qi of heaven and earth in the newbies area of the 3 kingdoms would probably be affected. Yi Chen didn't want to see this result. It was also because of this that Yi Chen deliberately rewarded the maids and eunuchs of the prince's residence. Then, through this, he hinted Empress He not to take the initiative to ask, not to look for the second prince, Lu Xie. That would be very boring. As for whether Empress He would do as Yi Chen said, Yi Chen didn't know. But Yi Chen was sure that Empress He would definitely understand his intention. Otherwise, why would Empress He suddenly stop after Yi Chen reprimanded the maids and eunuchs of the prince's residence? After hearing Yi Chen's question, Empress He was silent for a moment. Then, she sighed and said, "I admire the depth of your affection. Thank you for your praise, Your Highness." Yi Chen heard this and couldn't help but smile. After hearing Yi Chen's words, Empress He couldn't help but frown, but she immediately calmed down. In the next second, Empress He suddenly turned around and looked at Yi Chen. "When the prince's residence was first built, I came here to supervise many times." "Your Highness, you mean that this residence was built by His Majesty?" Yi Chen was stunned when he heard this. Then, he asked, very surprised. Yi Chen knew that the prince's residence was taken from He Jin by Lu Hong. But Yi Chen couldn't mention this, because as long as Yi Chen mentioned this matter, Empress He would definitely climb up the pole and mention General He Jin. After that, Empress He would definitely persuade He Jin to resolve the conflict between Yi Chen and He Jin. If it was before Yi Chen's rise, Empress He would definitely not do this because it was unnecessary. But it was different now. Yi Chen had risen. Not only did he save the Great Han Empire, but he also became the king of Yuzhou. Of course, the most important thing was that Yi Chen had an invincible army of more than 2 million soldiers. Lu Hong didn't know this, or rather, he was still kept in the dark. But Empress He was different. She knew the truth. As for the reason, it was very simple. General He Jin saw Yi Chen's army with his own eyes after the demon army that besieged Luoyang was wiped out by Yi Chen. And as the sister of General He Jin, Empress He would definitely get the exact information from He Jin. In this way, no matter how good Empress He was at tricking Lu Hong, no matter how much he tried to please Lu Hong, she wouldn't deliberately make an enemy out of Yi Chun, because she knew very well what Yi Chen's army of more than 2 million soldiers meant. To be more precise, if she provoked Yi Chun would very likely change the dynasty of the Great Han Empire. Empress, he didn't want to see such an outcome, because once such an outcome happened, everything she enjoyed now would disappear. It was also because of this that she hid the fact that Yi Chun had more than 2 million soldiers in her heart and didn't tell Lu Hong. Of course, the reason why Empress he didn't tell Lu Hong about it was because it was useless to tell her. After all, when Yi Jin found out that Yi Chun had more than 2 million soldiers and was extremely powerful, he told Lu Hong about it. Unfortunately, because of Zhang Li's participation, not only did Yi Jin fail to expose the secret, but he also angered Lu Hong. It could be said that Empress he was very afraid of Yi Chun. It was also because of this that she had the idea of reconciling with Yi Jin on behalf of Yi Chun. Otherwise, why would Empress he not only look for Yi Chun on the day before Yi Chen's wedding, but also point out that she had come to supervise the wedding many times? Chapter 814. Hearing Yi Chen's words, Empress he frowned again. She had not expected that the few times she purposely brought up the topic, Yi Chun would block it with a single sentence. This prevented her from saying what she wanted to say. After a moment of silence, Empress he suddenly smiled. Then, she turned and walked to the back of the house. Seeing this, Yi Chun frowned. What was this woman thinking? The back of the house was where the women lived. Normally, men couldn't go there, but women didn't have any restrictions. But the problem was that Yi Chun didn't have any women in the back of the house. Empress he knew this, but she still went to the back of the house. It would be strange if she didn't have any other thoughts. Seduction? She couldn't be. Thinking of this, Yi Chun looked at the graceful Empress he and frowned again. Damn, that might be the case. It was no wonder that Yi Chun thought this way. After all, Empress he was a very ambitious woman. This could be seen from how she used all kinds of methods to frame the former Empress and replace her to become the new Empress of the Great Han Empire. That was why Empress he was so ambitious. She knew that Lu Hong didn't have long to live and didn't make preparations for the future, even though he looked strong. At this moment, Yi Chun was the key for Empress he to make preparations for the future. After all, Empress he already knew how powerful Yi Chun, or Yi Chen's army, was from Heian. In Empress he's opinion, as long as she could win over Yi Chun, no matter if it was her or her son, Liu Bian, their positions in the future would be as stable as Mount Tai. No one could shake them. In order to achieve this goal, Empress he would do anything. It was precisely because of this that Yi Chun thought that Empress he was trying to seduce him when she went to the back of the house instead of going to the hall in the front of the house. F***CK. Even though this woman was young and pretty, he wasn't some brat. Where did she get the confidence to seduce him? Thinking of this, Yi Chun curled his lips in disdain. He then looked at the palace maids assigned to the prince consort's residence and said, "Her Highness wishes to tour the inner residence. 2 of you will accompany Her Highness for a tour." If it were any other player, facing Empress He's seduction, there was an 80% to 90% chance that they would cooperate. However, Yi Chun was different. To be more precise, Yi Chun was not the kind of man who would immediately turn hostile and heartless after pulling out that thing. To be more precise, if Yi Chun slept with Empress He would definitely keep Empress He in his hands. He would not let her feel wronged at all. It was not that Empress He was not attractive. After all, Empress He was not bad-looking, and she was only 25 or 26 years old. Even though Empress He had given birth to a child, she took good care of herself. She had a good figure, a good face, and a very fair skin. However, the problem was that Yi Chun's women were much better than Empress He. For example, they were younger, prettier, and had better figures. They all belonged to Yi Chun. Therefore, Yi Chun would never do anything that would bring trouble to himself for the sake of Empress He. It was not necessary, and the loss would outweigh the gain. Besides, there were countless super beauties waiting for Yi Chun to conquer. Empress He was nothing. As soon as Yi Chun finished speaking, 2 clever palace maids among the palace maids assigned to the prince consort's residence hurriedly stepped out and bowed to Yi Chun. Yes, you Lord Beach. After saying that, the two palace maids walked towards Empress He. Empress He, who was going to the back room, suddenly froze. Then her face turned green and then white. It was wonderful. When Yi Chun saw this, how could he not understand that his judgment had been correct? Thinking of this, Yi Chun curled his lips disdainfully. At this moment, the two palace maids of the prince consort's residence came to Empress He and bowed to her. Your Highness. Empress He tried to calm down her heart, which was about to explode. Then she looked at Yi Chun and said, Prince Consort, why don't you show me around? Is it because I'm not worthy? Your Highness, there is a difference in your words. This prince is also thinking for your Highness. After all, there are currently no women in this prince's residence. If this prince were to bring your Highness to the back residence, it would unavoidably lead to gossip. Although this prince's actions are righteous, I do not wish for your Highness' reputation to be tarnished because of this. Empress He's face darkened when she heard this, but she calmed down immediately. In the next second, Empress He looked at Yi Chun and said with a smile, Who dares to gossip? You should know that I'm the mother, and the prince consort is the son-in-law. What's wrong with the words of the mother and son-in-law? What the hell? How can this woman say such shameless words so easily? After Yi Chun married Lu Hong's adopted daughter, De Qiao and Xiao Qiao, he would indeed establish a mother and son-in-law relationship with Empress He. This was true, but the problem was that this so-called mother-son-in-law relationship was King illusory. To be more precise, Yi Chun was Yi Chun, and Empress He was Empress He. In essence, there was no relationship between them. Moreover, Yi Chun hadn't married to Qiao and Xiao Qiao yet. Empress He just had to say this. Wasn't it obvious that she didn't want to be shameless? Thinking of this, Yi Chun couldn't help but frown. Then he looked at Empress He and said, In that case, I'll show you around the prince consort's mansion personally. Facing Empress He, who didn't want to be shameless, Yi Chun couldn't refuse. After all, what Empress He said wasn't inappropriate at all. Of course, this was only if other people heard it. They wouldn't think it was inappropriate. Very good. Thank you, Prince Consort. Empress He smiled and said when she heard this. Then she looked at the two maids behind her and said, Stay here. By the way, teach the maids and eunuchs in the prince consort's mansion how to serve the prince consort and the two princesses. Yes, your Highness. Hearing this, the two maids behind Empress He bowed hurriedly. Then they walked toward the maids and eunuchs in the prince consort's mansion. Seeing this, Yi Chun frowned slightly. Then he looked at Empress He and said, Your Highness, please. When Empress He heard this, she smiled and walked towards the back of the house. Yi Chun took a look at Empress He's back, then followed her directly. On the way, Empress He didn't say anything. Yi Chun didn't say anything either. Empress He only stopped when she arrived at a pavilion in the back of the prince consort's residence. She then sat down on a stone bench in the pavilion. When Yi Chun saw this, he directly walked over and sat opposite Empress He. Yi Chun's behavior was very rude, but Empress He didn't mind it at all. After seeing Empress He's attitude, Yi Chun was even more sure of his judgment. This woman was really powerful and ruthless. Chapter 8:15. Thinking of this, Yi Chun immediately looked at Empress He and said, Your Highness, if you have something to say, just say it. Originally, Yi Chun wanted to block Empress He's words and let her leave. However, the development of the situation was beyond Yi Chun's expectation. To be precise, when Empress He realized that she couldn't make Yi Chun agree with her, she started to act shamelessly. Yi Chun couldn't deal with this. After all, Empress He was the empress of the Great Han Empire, the mother of the country. Yi Chun couldn't kill her, scold her, or beat her. He could only let her do whatever she wanted. Of course, even so, Yi Chun didn't want to waste time with Empress He anymore. After all, the longer Empress He stayed in the back of the prince consort's mansion, the more unfavorable it would be for Yi Chun. As for the reason, it was simple. Empress He was Lu Hong's wife. Although Lu Hong's health was deteriorating, he was still Empress He's husband in name. If Lu Hong knew that Empress He went to Yi Chun's place and stayed for 2 to 4 hours, or even longer, it would be strange if he didn't get angry. In this way, everything Yi Chen did before would be in vain. To be precise, the suspicion of Lu Hong that Yi Chen had just dispelled would be reignited. This was not the result that Yi Chen wanted to see. After hearing Yi Chen's straightforward words, Empress He glanced at Yi Chen and then sighed deeply. Alas, Empress He's sigh was full of melancholy, helplessness, and misery. Anyone who heard Empress He's sigh would think that Empress He had been greatly wronged in her heart. Moreover, it was a grievance that she couldn't speak out. Then, they would involuntarily have the impulse to ask about it. Yi Chen instantly noticed this and frowned. At this moment, Empress He suddenly raised her head to look at the sky and muttered to herself, "This consort was born in a butcher's family." Ever since this consort was sensible, this consort had fantasized that this consort's future husband would be a great man of indomitable spirit. But at this point, Empress He smiled bitterly and continued, "That's right. Things didn't go according to one's wishes. When I was 13, I encountered a bully who wanted to forcefully take me as his concubine. In order to protect me, my older brother accidentally killed the bully and was imprisoned." Empress He waved her right hand, and a pot of wine and 2 wine cups appeared on the stone table in the pavilion. In the next second, Empress He bent down to pick up the wine jug and poured 2 cups of wine. She directly picked up 1 cup and placed it in front of Yi Chen. Then, she picked up the other cup and drank it in 1 gulp. In order to save my older brother, this consort begged countless people and suffered countless hardships. The most abominable thing was that someone wanted to take me as his concubine, but didn't want to save my older brother. Empress, he said with a depressed expression and put down the wine cup. When Yi Chen heard this, he frowned. It wasn't that Yi Chen sympathized with Empress He's experience, but Yi Chen didn't want to continue listening. Unfortunately, this wasn't the right time to interrupt Empress He. Otherwise, Yi Chen wouldn't just frown. Empress He glanced at Yi Chen and laughed self-mockingly. "Yi Chen, you don't want to listen anymore? Do you think this consort is making up a story to win your sympathy?" When Yi Chen heard Empress He's words, if this was spread out, the whole world would be shocked. He couldn't help but be stunned. F***ck. She directly called my name and even called herself consort. What the F***ck is she doing? Thinking of this, Yi Chen frowned again and said in a deep voice, "Consort, I'll say the same thing again. If you have something to say, please say it clearly." When Empress He heard this, she smiled bitterly and said, "Perhaps today is the last time this consort will open her heart to speak. Why don't you want to listen to me?" When Yi Chen heard this, he glanced at Empress He and said in a deep voice, "Consort, please have some self-respect." When Empress He heard this, she suddenly became silent. After a long while, Empress He said, "I'm still a virgin. I'm still a virgin. Your Majesty, do you believe me?" "I don't believe you." When Yi Chen thought of this, Empress He, who was originally full of the aura of a young woman, suddenly changed. Then he saw that Empress He's body directly emitted an aura that was unique to a young woman. Yi Chen, who had sensed this, was immediately startled. F***ck. What a joke. Thinking of this, Yi Chen instantly released his divine sense and shrouded Empress He in it. In the next second, Yi Chen's eyes suddenly opened wide. F***ck. Who can tell me why Empress He, who has given birth to a child, is still a virgin? Could it be that Lu Hong's thing is only 1 centimeter? Wait. When Yi Chen thought of this, Empress He suddenly smiled sadly. Then, she raised the wine pot and drank it. Gulp, gulp. After a few gulps, the whole pot of wine was directly emptied by Empress He. When Yi Chen saw this, he frowned and looked at Empress He, who was still a virgin, and asked, "Who the hell are you?" Empress He had given birth to a child. However, although the Empress He in front of him looked exactly the same as Empress He, she was still a virgin. How could Yi Chen not be confused? As for Lu Hong's 1 centimeter, it was just Yi Chen's malicious guess. In fact, it was impossible for Lu Hong to have such a situation. Otherwise, how could Lu Bian come out? "I am Lian. My older sister, Hebai, died from dystocia when she gave birth to Bien. Before she died, she asked me to take good care of Bien. When Empress He heard this, she smiled sadly and then said, When Yi Chun heard this, he narrowed his eyes. At this moment, He Lian said, "When my brother was in trouble, I met a nameless old Taoist by chance. He taught me a special skill that can make people fall into an illusion without them knowing it. Otherwise, how could I have kept my virginity until now?" F***CK. This is a bit melodramatic. Thinking of this, Yi Chun immediately looked at Empress He, or He Lian, who replaced Empress He as Lu Bian's birth mother, but was actually Lu Bian's aunt. He asked, "Are you telling me all this so that I can support Lu Bian and resolve the grudge between me and Yi Jin?" When He Lian heard this, she smiled sadly and said, "Yes and no. If you have Beach agrees, it would be for the best. If you have Beach doesn't agree, I hope that you have Beach can help save me." When Yi Chun heard this, he couldn't help but frown. At this moment, He Lian sighed and said, "Although the special technique that this concubine practices is capable of creating illusions and causing others to fall into it without knowing, it also has an enormous flaw. Originally, this concubine did not know about it. However, recently, this concubine discovered its flaw." When Yi Chun heard this, he immediately looked at He Lian and said, "If you want to say it, then say it. If you don't want to say it, then leave. I don't have time to waste with you." When He Lian heard Yi Chun's impatient words, she gritted her teeth and said, "If I don't sleep with someone within a year, then I will lose my mind from the backlash of the special skill and become a promiscuous madwoman." Chapter 8:16. Yi Chun raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He looked at He Lian and asked, "You mean you want me to be your first man?" "Yes." He Lian's face turned red when she heard this. She lowered her head and answered softly. Yi Chun raised his eyebrows when he heard He Lian's affirmative answer. He looked at He Lian and asked, "Aren't you afraid that I will be ruthless? Not only will I not reconcile with Yi Jin, but I will also punish Lu Bian?" He Lian was stunned when she heard this. Her whole body stiffened. She didn't expect Yi Chun to talk about the matters between a man and a woman so simply and crudely. But in fact, Yi Chun really said it so simply and crudely. And for He Lian, who was still a virgin, the impact was too great. After all, He Lian was Empress He. Although she was the sister of the real Empress He, she lived like a princess. Who would dare to talk to her like this? After coming back to her senses, He Lian looked at Yi Chun with trembling eyes. She forced herself to calm down and said, "Even if the result is like this, I will accept my fate. All these years, I have done a lot for my brother. If it wasn't for you, Lord Beach, my brother would probably still want to steal the Han dynasty. If that time comes, I will be in a difficult position." Yi Chun looked at He Lian and said, "Your story is very strange. Your experience is very bizarre, but also very pitiful." He Lian's eyes lit up when she heard Yi Chun's words. At this moment, Yi Chun stood up and came to He Lian. He raised his right hand and lifted He Lian's chin with his index finger. He looked at He Lian seriously and said, "It's a pity that you're not qualified to be my woman." He Lian was the twin sister of the real Empress He. She was also a virgin. This was true, but so what? He Lian, who replaced the real Empress He and controlled the harem, was a jealous woman. She was also a vicious woman. Otherwise, how did she become the Empress and control the harem? And when Yi Chun said that he wouldn't reconcile with Yi Jin and would even punish Lu Bian, He Lian's response was to accept her fate. From this, it was not difficult to see He Lian's nature. One had to know that Yi Jin was He Lian's brother. A woman who could even give up her brother couldn't possibly have a good heart. It was also because of this that even if Yi Lian was a virgin, Yi Chun would not take her. Otherwise, Yi Chun's backyard would definitely be in chaos. Besides, He Lian was at most a second-rate historical beauty. Although Yi Chun liked beautiful women, he wouldn't lose control of his lower body because of a woman who was essentially a poisonous woman. Because of Yi Chun's actions, He Lian's face was red and her eyes were closed. When she heard this, her body suddenly stiffened and she opened her eyes. In the next second, He Lian looked at Yi Chun with a mournful expression and asked, "Why? This concubine is clearly a virgin. Why do you have Beach hate this concubine so much?" When Yichen heard this, he glanced at He Lian and said, "Your body is clean, but it doesn't mean your heart is clean. It's that simple." When He Lian heard this, her expression changed, and she hurriedly asked, "What did this concubine do to cause you of Beach to misunderstand?" When Yichen heard this, he couldn't help but frown and say in a low voice, "This prince doesn't want to disturb my family." When He Lian heard this, she immediately understood what Yichen meant. After she came back to her senses, He Lian said with a mournful expression, "This concubine is in the palace. No matter what this concubine does in the imperial palace, I have no other choice. Could it be that you of Beach can't even understand this?" When Yichen heard this, he immediately frowned and asked, "What does it have to do with me whether or not you have no other choice? This concubine." When He Lian heard Yichen's cold words, she immediately panicked and hurriedly spoke. However, before she could finish, she was interrupted by Yichen. "It's getting late. You should return to the palace." When He Lian heard this, her expression changed and she asked coldly, "Aren't you of Beach afraid that this concubine will speak ill of you in front of His Majesty?" He Lian had already learned from He Jin how terrifying Yichen's army was. However, due to Zhang Li's persuasion, she couldn't make Lu Hong suspect Yichen. Or rather, she couldn't make Lu Hong act against Yichen. In order to prevent things from developing in an uncontrollable direction, such as Yichen directly raising the flag of rebellion and overthrowing the Great Han Empire, He Lian chose to hide Yichen's secret. And now, in order to win over Yichen, He Lian had specially paid him a visit, told him her secret, and even offered herself to him. Who would have thought that what she thought would succeed would actually go wrong? Not only did Yichen not accept her, but he also didn't like her at all. This result seriously stimulated He Lian's nerves. It was to the point that He Lian had the thought of fighting to the death with Yichen. It was because of this that He Lian subconsciously threatened Yichen in front of Yichen. When Yichen heard this, his eyes narrowed and he shouted coldly, "There are many people in this world. If things are impossible, why would this prince be so stubborn?" Yichen wanted to take away all of the worldly providence from the Three Kingdoms beginners area. However, if there was really no other way, Yichen wouldn't be stubborn because of this. To be more precise, if He Lian really persuaded Lu Hong and made Lu Hong label Yichen as a traitor, Yichen also wouldn't care. This was because Yichen would directly change his previous plan and send out his army to sweep the world. When Yichen said this, a berserk murderous intent immediately soared up with a whoosh. At this moment, He Lian's face suddenly paled and she involuntarily took a few steps back. She didn't stop until she hit a pillar in the pavilion. At this moment, Yichen coldly glanced at the extremely pale He Lian and then said, "This prince is very clear. If you want to say it, go ahead. However, no matter what the result is, you will suffer this prince's anger because of this." As soon as Yichen finished speaking, the pond below the pavilion suddenly exploded with a bang. Then, the pond full of water and fish of all sizes in the pond directly soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the pond water turned into ice and the fish became ice sculptures. When He Lian saw this scene, her eyes suddenly shrank and she shouted in shock, "How? How is this possible?" He Lian knew that Yichen's bravery was unparalleled in the world and that no one could stop him. However, she never thought that Yichen's ability was completely beyond her imagination. In the middle of summer, with just a thought, he could turn the pond water into ice and the fish into ice sculptures. This was not something a mortal could do. It was also because she noticed this that He Lian was shocked. Nothing is impossible. He Lian, don't take this prince's warning as a joke. Others might not be able to do anything to you, but this prince has 10,000 ways to make you beg for death. Yichen shouted after hearing He Lian's exclamation and smiled coldly. Chapter 817. Yichen didn't want to see his plan of collecting all the providence from the beginner's area of the Three Kingdoms change because of He Lian. However, Yichen didn't want to be threatened by He Lian even more. It could be said that He Lian's hysterical struggle at the end had already angered Yi Chun. If He Lian hadn't played the role of being forced by Dongda in the plot of Dongda's rebellion, Yi Chun would definitely have killed He Lian on the spot. A little girl actually dared to threaten Yi Chun. She really didn't know how to spell the word death. Of course, Yi Chun definitely wouldn't kill her now. After all, He Lian was only threatening him verbally and hadn't taken action yet. If Yi Chun really killed He Lian on the spot, then there might really be a change in Dongda's chaos. After all, the beginning of Dongda's complete madness was when he forced himself on Empress He and Liu Bian's little empress. Without Empress He, who was the most attractive to Dongda, it was hard to say whether Dongda would be tempted by her. And if Dongda really wasn't tempted by her, then what he did later, such as dethroning the emperor and killing the emperor, might also change. In this way, even Yi Chun wouldn't be able to determine whether Dongda's rebellion would still happen. This kind of result wasn't what Yi Chun wanted to see. After all, Yi Chun was waiting for Dongda's rebellion and the power struggle between the vassals. As for whether He Lian would do something to disrupt Yi Chun's plan before Dongda's rebellion started, Yi Chun wasn't sure. However, Yi Chun knew that if he showed his transcendent power appropriately, he would be able to intimidate He Lian. If He Lian really dared to go all out, Yi Chun wouldn't care. At worst, he could just send out his troops and sweep the world. Of course, judging from the current situation, He Lian was really scared. So, the result was that He Lian would continue to hide everything she knew and continue to be Empress He. She would not anger Yi Chun. Yi Chun's words, which were filled with killing intent, made He Lian shudder. Then, she hurriedly bowed and said, "I'm sorry. I wouldn't dare. This concubine does not dare." At this moment, He Lian thought a lot of things. However, no matter how she thought about it, she came to the same conclusion. That was, Yi Chun was definitely not someone from the mortal world. No matter what she did, as long as she angered Yi Chun, she would definitely end up in an unimaginably miserable state. When Yi Chun heard this, he curled his lips in disdain. "You can leave now. Also, don't attack the Qiao and Xiao Qiao, and don't try to get close to the Qiao and Xiao Qiao." Otherwise, when Yi Chun said this, he looked at He Lian and narrowed his eyes. Then, she saw a cold glint flash in Yi Chun's eyes. When He Lian saw this, her pupils shrank and her body stiffened. In the next second, He Lian turned to Yi Chun with a pale face and bowed. "Yes, you of Beach." When Yi Chun heard this, he waved his hand. When He Lian saw this, she hurriedly bowed to Yi Chun again and left the back residence, trembling. Yi Chun glanced at the departing He Lian and curled his lips in disdain. A pitiful person must have a detestable side. Besides, you're not pitiful at all. He Lian had a vicious heart. She even gave up on her own brother. Even if her future would be miserable, she wouldn't attract the slightest bit of sympathy from Yi Chun. Lucia had already left this world for a few days. He had to hurry up and get him to come out. He had to gather all the subordinates he sent out. When he thought of this, Yi Chun willed the ancient contract book to appear in front of Yi Chun. Glancing at the ancient contract book floating in front of him, Yi Chun raised his right hand and pointed at the air. In that instant, a huge 8 trigrams formation appeared in the pavilion. The moment the 8 trigrams formation appeared, a mysterious aura rose from the ground. Then, the ancient contract book suddenly lit up. In the next second, a golden light flew out from the ancient contract book and landed on the ground. When the golden light dissipated, the second prince of the Great Han Empire, Lucia, appeared in the pavilion. Yi Chun glanced at Lucia, who came out of the ancient contract book, and said, "When you return to the palace, you were kidnapped. When you return to the palace, say that you were kidnapped by bandits. Fortunately, this prince found you and saved you. As for the location, say that it's the huge mountain stronghold west of Luoyang City." "Yes, master." After hearing Yi Chun's words, Lucia, who was feeling a little dizzy after coming out from the contracted space of the ancient book of contracts, immediately bowed and greeted Yi Chun with a loud voice. Lucia had already been subdued by Yi Chun using the ancient contract book. To be more precise, he was a slave. No matter what Yi Chun ordered Lu Xie to do, Lu Xie couldn't resist. He couldn't even think of harming Yi Chun. Otherwise, Lu Xie would be killed by the power of the contract. Lu Xie was very clear on this point. Although he was unwilling, there was nothing he could do. He could only accept his fate. When Yi Chun heard this, he nodded in satisfaction and said, "When you return, immediately send out the people you sent. After you go back, immediately call back all the people you sent out and withdraw the assassination order. After that, you can continue to be the second prince. Don't try to change the course of history. Otherwise, I won't let you off easily." "Yes, master." When Lu Xie heard this, his body trembled and he hurriedly bowed. When Yi Chun heard this, he nodded in satisfaction and said, "All right, you can return to the imperial palace." "Yes, master." When Lu Xie heard this, he bowed again. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left the pavilion, heading towards the front of the house. At this moment, 7 slender and beautiful palace maids walked over in a line. When they saw the second prince, Lu Xie, walking towards the front residence, they were all stunned and then hurriedly bowed to him. This servant pays respects to His Highness, the second prince. When Lu Xie heard this, he glanced at the 7 palace maids and expressionlessly nodded before continuing on his way. When the palace maids saw Lu Xie's response, they were stunned once more. When they came to their senses, they looked at each other and lined up to head for Yi Chun's pavilion. To them, their current master was Yi Chun, not the emperor of the Great Han, much less the prince of the Great Han. Thus, they didn't care how Lu Xie appeared here or why he was like a different person. The only thing they needed to do now was to please their new master, Yi Chun. When the palace maids arrived at the pavilion one by one, the palace maid at the front stepped forward and respectfully bowed to Yi Chun, saying, "Brother Yi Chun, I'm sorry. Lord, you have beached, dinner's ready." When Yi Chun heard this, he smiled and said, "This is the dinner. Just bring the dishes here." "Yes, Lord, you have beached." When the palace maid heard this, she hurriedly bowed and turned to the 6 palace maids behind her. "Go and prepare. Lord, you have beached wants to eat." When the 2 palace maids at the very back heard this, they hastily bowed and hurriedly left. At this moment, a palace maid hurriedly trotted over and bowed to Yi Chun. "Lord, you have beached. There's an extremely ugly man outside. He says he wants to see you have beached and can't be driven away." Chapter 8:18. Yi Chun couldn't help but be taken aback by the palace maid's words. "An extremely ugly man wants to pay a visit to me? Could it be Pang Tong?" Pang Tong was a top-class historical official, but unfortunately, because of his appearance, he had never been put in an important position. After several transfers, Pang Tong had finally followed the benevolent and righteous big-eared thief, Imperial Uncle Lu. Unfortunately, just like before, he had never been put in an important position. Of course, this process only lasted for a short period of time. After that, Pang Tong began to shine under Imperial Uncle Lu. Alas, Pang Tong's fate was not good. He had just begun to display the elegance of a top-class historical official when he died at the fallen Phoenix Slope. Of course, this was not important. What was important was Pang Tong's status as a top-class historical official. If that ugly man outside the door who wanted to pay a visit to Yi Chun was Pang Tong, then Yi Chun would definitely not let him off so easily. One had to know that the reputation of a young dragon and phoenix who could bring peace to the world was not for nothing. To be more precise, Pang Tong was truly talented. If Yi Chun really did take Pang Tong under his command, then Yi Chun's path to the imperial path of fortune would be even easier. With this thought, Yi Chun raised an eyebrow and turned to the palace maid who had come to deliver the message. "Invite him in. He could just come here." In the past, Yi Chun would definitely have personally come out to welcome him to show that he valued him. But now was not the past. Yi Chun's status had long surpassed that of all the civil and military officials of the Great Han Empire. Even those great clans with several hundred years of history could not compare to Yi Chun. Thus, Yi Chun did not need to put on a show of courtesy. All he needed to do was sit in the pavilion and wait for that extremely ugly man to come over. If it were anyone else, Doing this would probably make those historical generals or historical officials who wanted to join them dissatisfied, and they might even turn around and leave in anger. However, Yi Chen was not an ordinary person. Yi Chen was the great general of agile cavalry, the governor of Yuzhou, and the king of Yuzhou. His reputation had long been known by the whole world. As long as Yi Chen did not do anything muddle-headed, such as insulting, disdainful, or speaking ill of others, the historical generals and civil officials who wanted to join him would not have any thoughts of dissatisfaction. This was the convenience brought about by status and reputation. It was completely unreasonable. The palace maid who came to pass on the message was stunned when she heard this. She had never thought that Yi Chen would receive that extremely ugly man. Of course, the most important thing was that the palace maid had never thought that Yi Chen would let that extremely ugly man into the rear residence. After coming back to her senses, the palace maid who came to deliver the message hurriedly bowed and said, "Yes, you Lord Beach." After the palace maid who came to pass on the message finished speaking, she bowed and then hurriedly trotted to the front residence. "You Lord Beach, do you want to continue with the dinner?" The head of the palace maids who came to serve Yi Chen with 6 palace maids glanced at the palace maid who left and then bowed to Yi Chen. According to the normal etiquette, Yi Chen, as the host, should receive the guest in the front hall. However, Yi Chen had ordered that extremely ugly man to come here. Although the head of the palace maids was confused, she did not say anything. However, as a servant who served Yi Chen, she had to ask Yi Chen whether he wanted to continue with the dinner. Otherwise, it was very likely that she would make Yi Chen unhappy because of this. Hearing this, Yi Chen glanced at the head of the palace maids and then said, "Just continue. Just continue. Also, add an extra pair of chopsticks and some good wine." "Yes, you Lord Beach." When the head of the palace maids heard this, she hurriedly bowed and then turned to the other palace maids and whispered a few instructions. In the next second, the 2 palace maids slightly bent their knees and bowed, then hurriedly left. Before long, a group of palace maids carrying purple gold trays came to the pavilion and then placed the dishes made of mutton fat jade on the purple gold trays one by one on the stone table. When all the dishes were placed on the table, the head of the palace maids immediately stepped forward and removed the purple gold lids that covered the mutton fat jade dishes one by one. The palace maids behind her reached out and took the lids from the dishes each time the head of the palace maids removed the lids on the dishes. When all the dishes were presented to Yi Chen, a little palace maid led an extremely ugly man into the back residence. When Yi Chen saw this, he immediately looked at the extremely ugly man. When Yi Chen saw the appearance of the extremely ugly man, he could not help raising his eyebrows. It was really Pang Tong. Just as Yi Chen thought of this, the head of the palace maid standing in the pavilion serving Yi Chen picked up a wine pot made of white jade from the table and then poured a cup of wine for Yi Chen. At this moment, a familiar smell assailed his nostrils. When Yi Chen smelled this smell, he was slightly stunned and immediately frowned. It turned out to be 100 Flowers wine. 100 Flowers wine was one of the 10 most famous wines in the Untainted Land. When Yi Chen got the recipe of 100 Flowers wine, he directly threw it to his winemaker. Although Yi Chen's winemaker could not make the authentic 100 Flowers wine, he still made the best wine in the mortal world. Of course, the name was still 100 Flowers wine, and it became a unique specialty of Samsara City. Later on, in order to build the Copper Sparrow Pavilion, Yi Chen purposely released the 100 Flower wine and sold it at an extremely high price. Then, he used the 100 Flower wine to collect the precious materials needed to build the Copper Sparrow Pavilion and finally built it. After the outbreak of the Golden Turban Rebellion and the Demon Clan's invasion, the sale of 100 Flowers wine was suspended. Now, Yi Chen no longer needed the money of the mortal world, so Yi Chen completely stopped the sale of 100 Flowers wine and turned it into a special supply in Samsara Immortal City. Originally, Yi Chen thought that apart from Samsara Immortal City, there should be no other places to drink 100 Flowers wine. Who would have thought that this was not the case at all? It seemed that most of the 100 Flowers wine sold previously was in the hands of Lu Hong and Zhang Li. Wait, that's not right. Why didn't Lu Hong and Zhongli ask me for Hundred Flowers wine? Don't they know that Hundred Flowers wine comes from Samsara City? Yichen could not be blamed for being suspicious. After all, the allure of the Hundred Flower wine was extraordinary to people who loved wine. Even people who did not drink wine would not be able to resist tasting the Hundred Flower wine when they smelled it. However, it was precisely this kind of situation that gave rise to an abnormal phenomenon. Neither Lu Hong nor Zhang Li told Yi Chun about Hundred Flowers wine. How could Yi Chun, who was aware of this, not be puzzled? Something was wrong. There must be something wrong. Those businessmen who wanted to be the distributors of Hundred Flowers wine had all been to Samsara City. They must have known that Hundred Flowers wine came from Samsara City. Thinking of this, Yi Chun frowned again. At this moment, the little palace maid who brought Pang Tong to the pavilion bowed to Yi Chun. Lord Yu Beach, I brought him here. Chapter 819. When Yi Chun heard this, he collected his thoughts and looked directly at the extremely ugly Pang Tong. Before Yi Chun could speak, Pang Tong straightened his sleeves and solemnly bowed to Yi Chun. Pang Tong and Pang Shuan of Jingzhou and Xiangyang greet you at beach. When Yi Chun heard this, he nodded with a smile and said, "That's right." He then said, "This prince has heard of young Phoenix's name, but unfortunately, I have not had the opportunity to meet you. Today, I am able to meet Xiwan. This is truly a joyous occasion in my life. Many thanks to you of Beach for your praise." Tong is ashamed to accept it. When Pang Tong heard this, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he happily bowed. Pang Tong naturally had his reasons for visiting Yi Chun. He had originally been worried that his appearance would frighten Yi Chun and cause Yi Chun to dislike him. Who would have thought that the result would be completely out of his expectations? After seeing his appearance, Yi Chun did not look down on him or have any disgusting thoughts. Instead, he spoke in an extremely amiable manner. More importantly, Yi Chun's tone was filled with importance. How could Pang Tong, who had sensed this, not be happy? When Yi Chun heard Pang Tong's happy words, he laughed and said, "Xiwan, don't be modest. It is rare for us to meet today. Why don't we sit down and drink to our heart's content with this prince?" Deference is no substitute for obedience. When Pang Tong heard this, he immediately smiled and bowed to Yi Chun. After speaking, he walked directly to Yi Chun and sat down. When Yi Chun saw this, he couldn't help but smile. He then looked at a palace maid standing in the pavilion and indicated for her to pour wine for Pang Tong. Sensing Yi Chun's gaze, the palace maid hurriedly bowed slightly to Yi Chun. Then she walked to Pang Tong's side, picked up the wine jug, and poured wine for Pang Tong. When Hundred Flower wine flowed out of the jug, Pang Tong's oddly shaped nose involuntarily took a deep sniff. In the next second, Pang Tong's eyes suddenly opened, and he exclaimed in surprise, "Good wine." When Yi Chun heard this, he was slightly taken aback. Then, he looked at Pang Tong and asked, "Xiwan has never tasted this wine before?" When Pang Tong heard this, he was slightly startled. Then, he looked at Yi Chun and asked in astonishment, "Lord King Yu, Tong has never tasted this wine before. In fact, I have never even heard of it before. Could it be that this wine wasn't born recently?" When Chun heard this, his face immediately. Damn it, something was indeed not right. Sang's Lord Feng Yu said Lord of Lord Yu is Lord Bao Feng, is Lord Bei, and said Lord Beach Lord Speak. You Lord Beach, if Tong believes Tong, why don't you explain Tong? Perhaps Tong can help Lord Yu Lord Beach resolve your doubts. When Yi Chun heard this, he immediately returned to his senses and looked at Pang Tong with a chuckle. How could this prince not know of Xiwan's abilities? As for whether I believe or not, when Yi Chun said this, he raised his cup and drained the 100-flower wine in one gulp. After drinking, Yi Chun glanced at Pang Tong and then placed the empty cup back on the stone table. When the head palace maid standing behind Yi Chun saw this, she immediately stepped forward and refilled Yi Chun's cup. When the head palace maid finished pouring the wine and returned to stand behind Yi Chun said, "This prince believes in using people who do not doubt others. This prince's principle is don't doubt the people you use, and don't use those you doubt. Xuan, do you think this prince believes you or not? When Pang Tong heard this, he froze for a moment and then stood up without hesitation. After taking a few steps back, he solemnly bowed to Yi Chun and said, Jing province's Pang Tong and Pang Xuan are willing to follow my lord. I implore my lord to take us in. At first glance, Yi Chen's words sounded like a rhetorical question. However, the truth was that he was telling Pang Tong something. If he wanted to know the reason, he had to follow Yi Chun and acknowledge him as his master. Otherwise, Yi Chun would never tell him. As a top-class historical official, how could Pang Tong not understand the meaning behind Yi Chen's words? It was precisely because Pang Tong understood the meaning behind Yi Chen's words that he made his decision without hesitation. One must know that he had come here with the intention of following Yi Chun. Now that Yi Chun had directly brought this up, how could Pang Tong feign ignorance, even though he already knew the answer? The moment Pang Tong finished speaking, the system's notification sounded. Ding! The top-class historical official, Pang Tong and Pang Xuan, wishes to acknowledge you as their master. Will you accept? The moment the system's notification ended, Yi Chen's lips curled up, and he made his choice without hesitation. Accept. The moment Yi Chun made his decision, the system's notification sounded. Ding! Congratulations to player Yi Chun for successfully subduing the top-class historical official, Pang Tong and Pang Xuan. Due to their special identities, player Yi Chun is rewarded with 10 million taels of gold. The moment the system's notification ended, Yi Chun stood up and walked to Pang Tong. He stretched out his hands and helped Pang Tong up. In the next second, Yi Chun patted Pang Tong's shoulder and said seriously, It is my great fortune to be able to receive Xuan's help. Pang Tong and Pang Xuan greet the Lord. Pang Tong was overjoyed when he heard this. He then bowed to Yi Chun solemnly. Originally, Pang Tong's mood was still very rough. After all, although he could understand Yi Chun's intentions, he had no idea what choice Yi Chun would make and whether Yi Chun would accept him as a subordinate. He had no choice. After all, he was just too ugly. Now that the dust had settled, Pang Tong could naturally put down the stone that had been hanging in his heart. Then he relaxed. Of course, he was more excited than anything else. The moment Pang Tong finished speaking, the world's notification sounded. Ding! Congratulations to player Yi Chun for being the third person to gain the loyalty of the top-class historical official Pang Tong and Pang Xuan. Player Yi Chun is rewarded with 10 million taels of gold. The world's notification sounded 3 times in a row, instantly causing the entire world's channel to explode. F*CK. F*CK. Are you kidding me? Didn't Yi Chun just take in Huangsheng's family? Why did he take in a top-class historical official in the blink of an eye? And it's even the fledgling phoenix, Pang Tong. There's no justice in this world. He's taking in top-class historical generals and top-class historical officials one after another. Does he not want money? F*CK. I'm not convinced. Why is it that Yi Chun is either top-class or top-class? I can't even take in a third-class or low-class official. Stop talking nonsense. Why don't you take a look at Boss Yi Chen's identity and status? If those top-class historical officials don't look for Boss Yi Chun, do you think they'll look for you? Waha! You've all neglected one thing. Pang Tong is a short-lived ghost. He'll die soon. What are you all worried about? Chapter 820. F*CK. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten about it. Hee hee. Accepting Pang Tong is the same as not accepting him. This ugly guy can't do much. Idiot, you're overthinking it. Don't forget who Pang Tong ended up following. Royal Uncle Lu. How is Royal Uncle Lu now? He was killed by Yi Chun a long time ago. Even Guan Er and Zhang San were taken in by Yi Chun. Therefore, I'm sure that Pang Tong's fate won't be the same as it was in history. I think so too. Don't forget, Yi Chun is also a player. How could he not know how Pang Tong died? I'm sure that Yi Chun will find the person who killed Pang Tong and kill him. The world channel became extremely noisy because Yi Chun had suddenly taken in Pang Tong. Yi Chun glanced at it and curled his lips in disdain. Pang Tong died early, but by the time Pang Tong died in history, I would have already conquered the world and ascended. What's there to worry about? Yi Chun had been holding back and refusing to ascend because he wanted to wait for the start of the War of the Vassal States. Then, he would send out his troops and conquer the world. Finally, he would establish a country and ascend. Therefore, Pang Tong's fate wouldn't develop like it did in history. In the end, he would die at the hands of Liu Zhang's general, Zhang Run, at the fallen Phoenix Slope. It was for this reason that Yi Chun didn't care about Pang Tong's early death. Moreover, Yi Chun had the Yang Restoration Pill, the Copper Sparrow Pavilion that could revive the dead, and a powerful army that could conquer the world. He didn't have to worry about Pang Tong dying. Thinking of this, Yi Chun couldn't help but smile. He then looked at Pang Tong and said, "Shi Wan, I believe that Shi Wan will be like Feng Shao and become my right-hand man. Tong, I will do my best to live up to the Lord's trust." Pang Tong's eyes lit up when he heard this. He then bowed excitedly. Guo Yi and Guo Feng Shao had been following Yi Chun for a long time, so Pang Tong naturally knew about it. Of course, this was not important. What was important was that Pang Tong knew how much importance Yi Chun placed on Guo Yi. And now, Yi Chun was actually talking about him and Guo Yi together. How could Pang Tong not be excited? How could he not be excited? One had to know that Yi Chun's words were undoubtedly telling Pang Tong one thing, and that was that Yi Chun valued him very much. Otherwise, Yi Chun wouldn't have said something like that. This was undoubtedly what Pang Tong wanted to see the most. As soon as Pang Tong finished speaking, the system notification sounded. Ding! Pang Tong's loyalty plus 30 leveled up to die loyal. As soon as the system notification ended, Yi Chun raised his eyebrows. Not bad, not bad, another loyal subordinate. Thinking of this, Yi Chun couldn't help but smile. He then looked directly at Pang Tong and said, "I believe in Shi Wan. I believe in Shi Wan. Come, sit down with me and drink to your heart's content to congratulate Reincarnation Immortal City for having another great talent. My lord, don't be in a hurry. Tong, I would like to hear what you are confused about first." Pang Tong was overjoyed when he heard this, but he immediately shook his head and said. Yi Chun couldn't help but smile when he heard this. He then looked at the head of the palace maids in the pavilion and said, "You may leave now. All of you back down. Without this king's order, do not come over without permission." "Yes, you Lord Beach." When the head of the palace maids heard this, she hurriedly bowed and placed the wine pot on the stone table. Then, she led all the palace maids in the pavilion and hurriedly left. After all the palace maids had left, Yi Chun patted Pang Tong's shoulder and sat down on the stone stool again. When Pang Tong saw this, he immediately sat down opposite Yi Chun. Yi Chun looked at Pang Tong, who was quietly waiting for Yi Chun to speak. Then, he raised his wine cup and said, "This wine is called 100 Flowers Wine, and it is produced in Reincarnation City. Back then, in order to build the Bronze Sparrow Pavilion and make Yuzhou prosperous, I sold 100 Flowers wine to the public." After saying this, Yi Chun downed the entire cup of 100 Flowers wine in one gulp, then continued. Later, the Golden Turban swept the world, and the demon tribe invaded the human world. I led the army, and the sale of 100 Flowers wine ended immediately. However, I didn't expect that His Majesty and Zhang Chongshi, who should have been famous all over the world, didn't inquire about it. When Yi Chun said this, he placed the wine cup on the stone table and looked at Pang Tong. When Pang Tong heard this, he fell silent. After a while, he looked at Yi Chun and asked, "My lord, are you worried that someone is plotting against you and Reincarnation City?" "No." When Yi Chun heard this, he couldn't help but smile and said, "If it was in the past, I might be worried. However, things are different now. I am confident that I can get rid of all the demons and monsters. Therefore, I'm not afraid of any conspiracy or scheme. My lord, do you want to know who is behind the 100 Flowers wine?" When Pang Tong heard this, he was stunned. He hurriedly looked at Yi Chun and asked. Pang Tong didn't expect that his first guess would be rejected by Yi Chun. This was not a good thing for Pang Tong. who had just vowed to do his best to not disappoint Yi Chun. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked the next question in such a hurry. Of course, Pang Tong's guess was wrong because he didn't know the exact strength of Reincarnation Immortal City. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such a guess. When Yi Chun heard Pang Tong's question, he nodded and said, "That's right. I also didn't expect such a thing to happen to a small 100 flowers wine. Although your majesty doesn't know that the 100 flowers wine came from Reincarnation Immortal City, I don't want to be kept in the dark. I don't want to be used by others." After the 100 flowers wine appeared and was officially sold, its reputation spread. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many merchants rushing to Reincarnation City to buy the 100 flowers wine and resell it. However, until now, Lu Hong and Zhang Li had not asked Yi Chun about the 100 flowers wine. They had clearly told Yi Chun one thing. The 100 flowers wine, which was supposed to be world famous, was actually in the hands of a certain person or force. It was then used to supply the palace and the eunuchs. As for the news about the 100 flowers wine, it was naturally hidden by this person or force. Otherwise, Lu Hong and Zhang Li would have asked Yi Chun about the 100 flowers wine and asked for a large amount. This was what Yi Chun was puzzled about. Yi Chun couldn't think of anyone who had the ability to hide the news about the 100 flowers wine. When Pang Tong heard this, he nodded and fell silent. After 10 minutes, a hint of hesitation flashed across Pang Tong's face, but he quickly regained his composure. In the next second, Pang Tong raised his head to look at Yi Chun and asked, "Your Majesty, do you know who is the most abnormal among the Inhumans?" When Yi Chun heard this, he was stunned. Inhumans were players. It was a special term given to players by the natives of the Three Kingdoms. This was also the reason why Pang Tong hesitated when he spoke. After all, Yi Chun was a player, or rather, an Inhuman. Of course, this was not important. What was important was that Yi Chun could not understand Pang Tong's words. To be more precise, Yi Chun had never thought about the player faction from the very beginning. After all, to be able to completely seal off the news of 100 Flowers Brew, to the point that even Lu Hong did not know the origin of the 100 Flowers Brew, was not something that just any player could do. Yi Chun immediately frowned when he thought of this. At this moment, Pang Tong, who was sitting opposite Yi Chun, smiled faintly and opened his mouth to speak. "Master, the soul of the Qin Emperor's mother, Zhao Ji, has appeared before. Is that true or false?" Chapter 821. When Yi Chun heard Pang Tong's words, he could not help but be taken aback. Zhao Ji's soul had indeed appeared before. It had appeared after Yi Chun led his troops to suppress the traitor Zhang Chun and took over Yubei Ping City. Otherwise, Yi Chun would not have been able to obtain the 9 Cauldron treasure map fragment back then. At that time and place, it was reasonable to say that no one other than Yi Chun and Yi Chun's subordinates would know about the appearance of Zhao Ji's soul. However, the truth was that Pang Tong actually knew about it. Otherwise, why would Pang Tong mention Zhao Ji? After regaining his senses, Yi Chun looked directly at Pang Tong and asked, "How did Shiwan know about this?" After Pang Tong heard Yi Chun's question, he did not dare to delay and hurriedly said, "My lord, when Tong was traveling the world, he once met a crazy man in northern P City." Tong heard the 2 words "beautiful lady Zhao" from his mouth. When Yi Chun heard this, he was stunned again and his face stiffened. Damn it, why would Pang Tong believe the words of a crazy man? What AF Asterisk King hit? Wait, crazy. Damn it, that crazy man couldn't be a servant in Zhang Chun's residence, right? When Yi Chun led his troops to take over Yubei Ping City, he directly killed Zhang Chun's family and all his subordinates. He only ignored Zhang Chun's servants and maids. Of course, Yi Chun was sure that when Zhao Ji's soul appeared, there were no outsiders around. Now, Pang Tong said that he heard Zhao Ji's name from a crazy man. At first glance, there was nothing wrong with it. After all, no matter what a crazy man said or did, there was no trace of him. However, if this crazy man was with Zhang Chun, Yubei Ping City, and Zhao Ji, it would not be so simple. To be more precise, that so-called crazy man was most likely Zhang Chun's servant. Then, When Yi Chun led his troops to attack Zhang Chun's residence, he was lucky enough to hide in a hidden place and avoid being searched by Yi Chen's soldiers. Then, this hidden servant of Zhang Chun's saw Zhao Ji's soul and was scared witless. Damn it, this Pang Tong's deductive ability was too amazing. He actually guessed that Zhao Ji's appearance from a simple sentence. Thinking of this, Yi Chun was stunned. Wait, Pang Tong talked about the players one moment, then Zhao Ji's name. Zhao Ji's not dead? Yi Chun immediately frowned when he thought of this. Impossible. Zhao Ji was clearly killed by Gui Yi's eye of the demon god. I saw it with my own eyes. It can't be fake. Just as Yi Chun thought of this, Pang Tong, who was sitting in front of Yi Chun, chuckled. Then, he raised his wine cup and drank happily. When Yi Chun saw this, his face froze. He then glared at Pang Tong. Damn it, this was the bad thing about historical officials. They all like to keep people in suspense. Pang Tong, who had just drunk the 100-flower wine, was about to put down his cup when he saw Yi Chun's gaze. In that instant, Pang Tong's face froze. In the next second, Pang Tong hurriedly put down his cup and smiled. My lord, please forgive me. This 100-flower wine is really too tempting. I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. Hearing this, Yi Chun raised his eyebrows. He then looked at Pang Tong with a serious expression and said, Shi Wan, in the future, if you don't tell Feng Xiao what you want to say, hide it or only tell half of it, your lord will definitely give the order to deduct all of your 100-flower wine every month. I won't give you a single drop. When Pang Tong heard this, he was stunned. When Yi Chun saw Pang Tong's expression, he smiled and continued, Oh, right. The 100-flower wine in the reincarnation immortal city is 1,000 times, no, 10,000 times better than the 100-flower wine here. If you can't drink it, don't blame me for not warning you. When Pang Tong heard this, he was stunned again. Then his eyes lit up. In the next second, Pang Tong bowed to Yi Chun without hesitation. My lord, Zhao Ji was from the pre-Qin period. Since her soul could survive for so long, I'm sure that the souls of others can also survive for a long time. For example, Lu Buwei. When Yi Chun heard this, his eyes narrowed. Lu Buwei was an extremely special person in the pre-Qin period. Not only was he an official, but he was also a great merchant of the Qin dynasty. If what Pang Tong said was true, and Lu Buwei's soul was the same as Zhao Ji, who was killed by Gui Yi, then the number of merchants in the Great Han Empire who were related to Lu Buwei would definitely exceed 50%, or even 80 to 90%. If that was the case, it would be easy to explain why Lu Hong didn't know where the 100-flower wine was produced. Damn it, maybe it was Lu Buwei who did it. That guy seemed to like to buy low and sell high. But damn it, why did he hoard the 100-flower wine and hide the news of it? For Qin Shi Huang? Impossible. He drank poison and committed suicide because of Qin Shi Huang to enjoy the pleasure of making money? Or did he have other motives? When he thought of this, Yi Chun frowned. Wait, an abnormal player, Lu Buwei. Just as Yi Chun thought of this, Pang Tong, who was sitting opposite Yi Chun, spoke again. My lord, Qin Shi Huang wanted eternal life, so he sent Su Fu out of the Eastern Sea to find a way to achieve immortality. Lu Buwei was a genius and also wouldn't yield to the 100-year limit. When Yi Chun heard this, his eyes widened. Damn it, everything makes sense now. If it was really Lu Buwei, he would definitely be interested in the player's immortality ability. Then, he would be like Zhao Ji in his previous life, possessing the player's body and stealing the player's body. Damn it, it was definitely Lu Buwei. Apart from him, no one else could hide the news of the 100-flower wine for so long. When he thought of this, Yi Chun's face darkened. No matter what Lu Buwei wanted, as long as he possessed the player's body, he would definitely obtain the player's memories. Then, Lu Buwei's goal would definitely change. This was similar to Lu Xie, who obtained Li Mubai's memories, and Liang Fulong, who knew his own fate. Both did abnormal things in order to change their fates. And this was not good news for Yi Chun. After all, once Lu Buwei became a player, he would have new ambitions, such as ascension. In this way, Lu Buwei hoarded the 100-flower wine and hid the news of the 100-flower wine for more than just money. What was this bastard trying to do? Just as Yi Chen thought of this, a term suddenly appeared in Yi Chen's mind. The dynasty of Providence. Thinking of this, Yi Chen's eyes narrowed, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. Chapter 822. One cannot blame Yi Chen for thinking this way. After all, Lu Buwei came from the pre-Qin dynasty and had once assisted Qin Shi Huang. Therefore, he definitely knew about the 9 cauldrons and the secret realm in the underground palace. He even knew that Qin Huang, Ying Zheng, was plotting to ascend. To be more precise, Lu Buwei was 100% aware of the extremely special and insane method of ascension, which was to establish a dynasty of Providence and then ascend with the whole country. This way, Lu Buwei, whose soul had survived until now, definitely wouldn't give up on a method of ascension. Because of his talent, because of his ambition of immortality, and also because he knew very well what national ascension meant. However, Lu Buwei didn't dare to jump out. This was because there was still the secret realm, Qin Huang's Ying Zheng, and the pre-Qin zombie army. Of course, the most important thing was that before the game started, the Great Han Empire had a strong army and was like the sun in the sky. If he dared to jump out, he would definitely attract the attention of Qin Huang's Ying Zheng and the Great Han army. In the end, his plan would completely fail. This wasn't what Lu Buwei wanted to see. Therefore, Lu Buwei could only continue to wait. This situation continued until the game officially started and players appeared. Then, Lu Buwei, who had been waiting all this time, sensed an opportunity. This was because the Great Han Empire was weakening day by day, and chaos was happening. Also, the players were too special and couldn't be killed. Therefore, Lu Buwei took the opportunity and chose to possess someone, becoming a special player. However, Lu Buwei still didn't jump out. This was because the Great Han Empire hadn't completely fallen and the secret realm still existed. However, Lu Buwei, who had obtained the players' memories, further sensed the uniqueness of the players. He also sensed that they could directly ascend with their own strength. Therefore, Lu Buwei used the identity of a player to continue his plan while killing monsters and leveling up. He continued to run the business that he had maintained for hundreds of years while contributing to the decline of the Great Han Empire. He needed to wait for an opportunity that would allow him to soar into the sky. To be more precise, Lu Buwei wanted to wait for the Qin First Emperor in the underground mystic realm to ascend and then leave this world. Also, the Great Han Empire would be in complete chaos and war would break out everywhere. Only with this result could he, Lu Buwei, be free to plan for his country's ascension. However, Lu Buwei didn't expect that there would be a monster among the players who completely exceeded his expectations. Yi Chen. To be more precise, Yi Chen's rise was so fast that even Lu Buwei did not expect it. By the time he began to pay attention to Yi Chen had already become the great general of light cavalry and the governor of Yuzhou. Both his strength and influence were rapidly expanding. Of course, what Lu Buwei found most unacceptable was that this freak Yi Chen had taken in one after another the top generals and civil officials of this era. The other natives did not know what these generals and civil officials represented. But how could Lu Buwei, who had successfully possessed a player's body and obtained their memories, not know? Lu Buwei wanted to kill Yi Chen, but unfortunately, Yi Chen was too strong. With his own strength, he had killed millions of players in Luoyang. Moreover, he had killed them thoroughly. This caused Lu Buwei to be thoroughly frightened. He had no choice but to reconsider how to deal with Yi Chen. Until one day, when 100 Flowers wine appeared, Lu Buwei sensed an opportunity. To be precise, Lu Buwei sensed the possibility of using 100 Flowers wine to eliminate Yi Chen, his biggest competitor. How to eliminate him was very simple. Kill with a borrowed knife. Whose knife? Of course, it was Lu Hong's knife. This was because Lu Buwei, who knew about the Providence dynasty, knew very well that Yi Chen was unwilling to ascend even though he had reached a certain level because he wanted to obtain all the providence in the Three Kingdoms newbie zone. As long as something happened to Lu Hong, Yi Qin's official position and title would definitely be removed. Yi Qin would also be labeled as a traitor. This way, Yi Qin's plan would completely fail. Then, he would not be able to establish the Providence dynasty, much less ascend as a nation. In the end, Yi Qin could only obediently ascend to the primeval age and give up on his plan to ascend as a nation. F*CK. That must be it. Even if these inferences were somewhat different from the real situation, it couldn't be that far off. At this thought, Yi Qin's expression turned cold, and a violent killing intent instantly rose. My lord, do you have any leads? Pang Tong, who was sitting opposite Yi Qin, hurriedly looked at Yi Qin and asked after sensing the violent killing intent coming from Yi Qin. Yi Qin shook his head and said, I don't know who it is. I can't tell who exactly it is, but there is one thing that I can be sure of. The one who did this is Lu Buwei. With over 100 million players, Yi Qin really couldn't confirm who Lu Buwei had possessed. Otherwise, Yi Qin wouldn't have stayed here. He would have teleported over and killed the special player, who looked like a player, but whose soul was Lu Buwei. Pang Tong nodded and hurriedly said, My lord, I'm afraid that Lu Buwei will be the culprit. My lord, Lu Buwei must have planned to poison His Majesty to murder him. Once Lu Buwei's plan succeeds, he will definitely spread the news that the 100 Flowers wine is produced in Samsara City. My lord will be greatly affected by this. What Shiwan said is correct. I will go to the Imperial Palace and capture all of the eunuchs who tested the poison. When Yi Qin heard this, he nodded and said, Lu Buwei had poisoned the 100 Flowers wine. Yi Qin had guessed it even if Pang Tong didn't mention it. After all, using the 100 Flowers wine to plot against Yi Qin was the only way to poison and frame him. Therefore, Yi Qin couldn't give Lu Buwei the chance to succeed. The moment Yi Qin finished speaking, Pang Tong hurriedly shook his head and said, My lord, capturing the eunuchs to test the poison is basically useless. Yi Qin was stunned when he heard this. At this moment, Pang Tong continued, My lord, the emperor's food and drink are all tested for poison. As long as you bribe or control the tester, you can successfully poison His Majesty to death. However, Lu Buwei would never choose this method. Shiwan, are you talking about mixing poisons? Yi Qin's eyes widened when he heard this. Then, he looked at Pang Tong and asked. Pang Tong nodded and said, That's right. My lord, if Lu Buwei wanted to plot against you, it wouldn't be as simple as poisoning. That's because this method of poisoning is too inferior, and it's very easy to be discovered. Pang Tong glanced in the direction of the palace and continued. However, mixing poisons is different. No matter how you examine and test the poison, you won't be able to find any problems. However, if you mix 2 or more poisons together or consume them one after the other, they will mix in the body and produce a lethal poison. This way, even if there are more testers, His Majesty won't be able to escape. Once His Majesty dies from the poison, even if you take out the real 100 Flowers wine, you won't be able to clear your name. At that time, Chapter 823. When Yi Qin heard Pang Tong's words, he took a deep breath and exhaled deeply. He looked at Pang Tong and asked in a deep voice, Shiwan, is there a way to find out who is possessed by Lu Buwei? My lord, Tong has observed an eccentric before. As Pang Tong spoke, he suddenly remembered that the lord he had just acknowledged, Yi Qin, was an eccentric. In that instant, the words Pang Tong wanted to say abruptly stopped. When Yi Qin saw this, he glared at Pang Tong and said, Just say it. Just say it. I, your lord, am not that petty. Yes, my lord. When Pang Tong heard this, he laughed awkwardly and said, My lord, the otherworlders have a common trait. That is, they don't fit in with this world. No matter how much they learn or imitate, they will always carry the unique flavor of an otherworlder. How can I not know what Shiwan is saying? But if that's all, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. We still won't be able to find Lu Buwei. When Yi Qin heard this, he couldn't help but frown. Players came from the real world and wanted to imitate the ancients' way of speaking and behavior. Basically, they tried to imitate a tiger, but ended up looking like a dog instead. No matter how they looked at it, it was very awkward. This was a common problem among players. If Yi Chun hadn't been reborn, Yi Chun wouldn't have been able to hide the unique aura of an otherworlder. Of course, this wasn't important. What was important was that, based on this point, the chances of finding Lu Buwei, who spoke and acted exactly like the ancients, were pitifully low. When Pang Tong heard this, he smiled slightly and said, "My lord, this is the otherworlder. My lord, this is one of the reasons. The second reason is that even if Lu Buwei possessed a body and became a mutant, his business empire still exists. Therefore, among the mutants, the one with the most wealth is the most suspicious." What else? Hearing this, Yi Chun took a glance at Pang Tong and asked in a displeased manner. When Pang Tong heard Yi Chun's question, he suddenly remembered what Yi Chun had said before: "Don't learn from what Yi and keep people in suspense." In that instant, his face froze. After regaining his senses, Pang Tong coughed a few times and hurriedly said, "Thirdly, Lu Buwei has survived to this day and still wants to poison His Majesty and plot against His Majesty. He must be up to something big. Therefore, he must have a well-equipped army of no less than 100,000 men. They are all young and strong." When Yi Chun heard this, his eyes widened. F***CK. I almost forgot about this. No matter how good that bastard Lu Buwei was at acting, he was still aiming for the dynasty of Providence. If he wanted to achieve this goal, he would need a powerful army. Fortunately, my realm is high enough. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to find Lu Buwei's private army. Thinking of this, Yi Chun narrowed his eyes. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. In the next second, Yi Chun looked directly at Pang Tong and said, "Shi Wan, I'll send you to Reincarnation Immortal City. When you get there, you can look for Feng Xiao or Zizhong. They will arrange everything for you. Oh yes, I'll impart to you another technique." Pang Tong was stunned when he heard this. At this moment, Yi Chun pointed at the void. The technique information in the Chaos Talisman instantly turned into a ball of golden light and flew directly to Pang Tong's forehead. Just as Pang Tong began to receive the information in the Chaos Talisman, Yi Chun's mind moved and the Khanate treasure, the cauldron of heaven and earth, appeared instantly. After glancing at the cauldron of heaven and earth, Yi Chun grabbed at the void with his right hand. A ball of creation chi flew out and was then slapped onto Pang Tong's body by Yi Chun. After doing all this, Yi Chun waved his right hand and a magic treasure sword and a spiritual armor appeared instantly. At this moment, Yi Chun glanced at the stupefied Pang Tong and smiled slightly. Then, with a suction force from his right hand, 2 drops of essence blood instantly appeared on Pang Tong's body. Then, they flew directly toward the magic treasure level long sword and the spirit level armor. When Pang Tong's blood essence dripped onto the 2 pieces of equipment, they instantly glowed red and disappeared without a trace. In the next second, Yi Chun's mind moved and the space in front of him was instantly distorted. After glancing at the distorted space, Yi Chun looked directly at Pang Tong, who was dumbfounded by the information in the Chaos Talisman, and said, "All right, go over there." After finishing his words, Yi Chun kicked Pang Tong's buttocks and sent him directly into the distorted space. At this moment, an inexplicable cry of ecstasy rang out instantly. "Pang Tong, Pang Xuan, swear to follow Master till death. If I violate this oath, may the heavens and earth destroy me and my soul perish." As soon as the voice fell, the distorted space disappeared. Hearing Pang Tong's cry of ecstasy, Yi Chun couldn't help but smirk. Then, with a wave of his right hand, he instantly withdrew the cauldron of heaven and earth back into his mind palace. In the next second, Yi Chun looked directly at the imperial palace. Then, with a thought, he released his enormous divine sense and covered the entire Luoyang in an instant. After a few breaths, Yi Chun smiled coldly, then took a step forward and disappeared in an instant. Luoyang Imperial Palace, Imperial Wine Cellar. A young eunuch who had been ordered to carry the fine wine, opened the door of the wine cellar and was immediately stunned. Then, he rubbed his eyes in disbelief. A few seconds later, after the little eunuch had repeatedly confirmed that the imperial wine cellar was empty, he immediately opened his throat and let out an extremely sharp scream. Not good. The great thief has stolen all the tribute wine. His Majesty's favorite hunter-flower wine has also been stolen. Whoosh! The Yunlin army who had just patrolled here was instantly in an uproar and rushed over together. Luoyang, Zhang Li's residence. Thump, thump, thump. Panicked footsteps could be heard all the way. Zhang Li, who was listening to the young eunuch's report, couldn't help but frown when he heard the panicked footsteps. He then looked at the young eunuch who had run to the entrance of the hall and sternly shouted, "What is it? Why are you so flustered?" "Lord Permanent Attendant, the wine is gone." When the young eunuch heard Zhang Li's reprimand, he suddenly shivered and hastily bowed. What? Zhang Li was taken aback when he heard this, and then he looked at the young eunuch in confusion. The 100-flower wine is gone. It's all gone. The young eunuch hastily bowed. When Zhang Li heard this, his eyes suddenly widened, and he stood up with a tongue sound. In the next second, Zhang Li arrived in front of the young eunuch in a few steps. He then grabbed the young eunuch's collar and shouted angrily. He angrily shouted, "My 10,000 jars of 100-flower wine is gone. No, no more." When the young eunuch heard this, he suddenly trembled and then stuttered. When Zhang Li heard this, his face darkened, and he threw the young eunuch out of the hall. A second later, Zhang Li looked at the young eunuch in the hall and sternly roared, "Investigate this matter. Investigate this matter. Find out who did it. This lowly one will tear him to pieces." Chapter 824. 10,000 meters up in the sky, Yi Chun, who had just collected all of Luoyang's 100-flower wine, looked at the palm-sized Luoyang on the ground and smirked. "Damn it, I never thought that I would become a great thief one day. Too bad there's nothing good. Otherwise I would have taken all of Lu Hong's and Zhang Li's treasures in one go." But then again, his previous judgment was right. The 100-flower wine sold in Samsara City had been mixed with poison. Thinking of this, Yi Chun looked at the 100-flower wine floating in front of him. It had turned completely black and was emitting a foul stench. Luckily, I took in Pang Tong at this time. If not for his reminder, I wouldn't have thought of Lu Buwei. Thinking of this, Yi Chun let out a long breath and flicked his finger at the 100-flower wine floating in the sky. With a buzzing sound, a fireball appeared and flew straight towards the 100-flowers poison brew. The moment the fireball touched the 100-flower wine, the wine was ignited and turned into a cloud of black smoke in the blink of an eye. Then, it dissipated with the wind. It was time to settle the score with Lu Buwei. Thinking of this, Yi Chun smiled coldly. With a thought, he released his powerful consciousness and covered the entire Great Han Empire. If Yi Chun wanted to find Lu Buwei, he had to find the private soldiers that Lu Buwei had secretly trained. Once Yi Chun found Lu Buwei's private soldiers, he could use them to find Lu Buwei, who had become a special player. In this way, Yi Chun could get rid of the scourge Lu Buwei. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea passed, Yi Chun's eyes widened. Found him. Thinking up to this point, Yi Chun willed the space in front of him to distort. Looking at the twisted space, Yi Chun stepped into it and disappeared. 300 miles to the south of Wuling County in Jingzhou, there was a secluded forest in the deep mountains. A group of 100,000 soldiers wearing black armor and holding long halberds were doing basic training while sweating profusely. Kill! Kill! The 100,000 soldiers continued to wave the halberds in their hands, stabbing, slashing, and sweeping. This was an attack unique to the halberd. It was simple and crude, but its lethality was extraordinary. However, compared to ordinary spears, it was heavier and more difficult to operate. Therefore, soldiers who used halberds as weapons had to be young and strong. Moreover, they had to go through a long period of training to be able to perfectly unleash the power of the halberd. As for the 100,000 soldiers here, without exception, they were all robust young men. Furthermore, They were robust young men with muscles all over their bodies. Just as the 100,000 soldiers were doing their best to train, a pillar of light suddenly appeared not far from them. When the pillar of light disappeared, a young man dressed as a player appeared. At this moment, a man dressed as a commander saw the sudden appearance of the player. After a slight pause, he hurriedly trotted over and bowed to the player. Black Tiger Army Commander Li Yuanba greets the great general. When the player who had just come online heard this, he glanced at the man who called himself Li Yuanba and immediately shouted, "Hurry up and spread the word. Everyone, go home and rest for 3 days. 3 days later, gather at the Eastern Sea." Yes, great general. When the army commander of the Black Tiger Army who called himself Li Yuanba heard this, he was momentarily stunned. Then, he bowed to the player who had just come online. Right at that moment, the space beside the two of them suddenly distorted. Then, a handsome man with a berserk aura appeared there. At this moment, all was silent. The 100,000 soldiers who were training here all stopped in unison and looked directly at the young man who had suddenly appeared here. At the same time, the eyes of the player who had just come online shrank abruptly. Then he shouted in shock, "Yi Chun!" The person who had come was none other than Yi Chun. He had specially come here to track down Lu Buwei. Yi Chun. After hearing the player's exclamation, Yi Chun smiled coldly. Then he raised his right hand and pointed at the empty space. A buzzing sound was heard. The player who had just been startled was instantly fixed to the spot by Yi Chun's magic power. Noticing that the player who had been immobilized was unable to move, his expression changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Chun and shouted, "Lord you of Beach, I'm not your enemy. Why are you doing this?" When Yi Chun heard this, he curled his lips in disdain. However, before Yi Chun could speak, the army commander of the Black Tiger Army, who called himself Li Yuanba's face darkened. Then he raised his hands, and 2 enormous hammers instantly appeared in his hands. When Yi Chun saw this, he couldn't help but be stunned. Then he looked directly at Li Yuanba and asked, "What's your name? What's your second brother's name?" When Li Yuanba heard this, his eyes widened and he shouted angrily, "Why do you care what my second brother's name is? Hurry up and withdraw your sorcery. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite." When Yi Chun heard Li Yuanba's words, he couldn't help but frown. Then he waved his right hand and slapped Li Yuanba. When Li Yuanba saw this, his eyes suddenly shrank. However, before he could react, Yi Chun's right hand directly slapped his face. "Pah!" Li Yuanba's face was instantly deformed. Then Li Yuanba and the 2 hammers in his hands flew out diagonally. Bang, bang, bang. A series of collision sounds were heard. It was caused by Li Yuanba crashing into and breaking over a dozen trees. When the 100,000 soldiers who had stopped their training saw this, they were all stunned. Then their eyes widened in unison. When the player who was imprisoned by Yi Chun saw this, he couldn't help but shudder. Then he hurriedly looked at Yi Chun and shouted, "Lord you of Beach, please ask whatever you want. I'll tell you everything I know." When Yi Chun heard this, he glanced at the player and asked, "Who's the one who's in charge of these soldiers?" "Qian Duo Duo. My boss's name is Qian Duo Duo." When the player who was questioned by Yi Chun heard this, he answered without hesitation. When Yi Chun heard this, he glanced at the player. Then, with a wave of his right hand, the thick black godslayer instantly appeared in his hand. "Lord you of Beach, I'm not lying. It's really Qian Duo Duo." Seeing Yi Chun suddenly summon the godslayer, the player's eyes shrank. Then, he hurriedly shouted in a shrill voice. As soon as he finished speaking, the captains among the 100,000 soldiers who had stopped their training looked at each other. Then, they shouted in unison, "Betrayal of the Lord. Kill without mercy. Kill, kill, kill." Deafening battle cries immediately rang out. In the next second, the 100,000 soldiers raised their halberds and charged towards Yi Chun and the players who were imprisoned by Yi Chun. Chapter 825. Yi Chun frowned when he saw this. What's the point of keeping them if they can't be used by me? Originally, Yi Chun wanted to recruit these 100,000 strong young soldiers and turn them into the elite soldiers of the reincarnation immortal city. Who would have thought that the loyalty of these 100,000 soldiers to Qian Duo was so high that it exceeded Yi Chen's expectations? Even if Yi Chun subdued these soldiers by force, he might not be able to gain their 100% loyalty. Of course, as time passed, these soldiers might become loyal to Yi Chun. However, the prerequisite was that there was enough time. And at this moment, the thing that Yi Chun lacked the most was time. It should be known that the chaos of Dongda and the struggle for hegemony would begin soon. Yi Chun didn't have that much time to do something like reform. Thinking of this, Yi Chun's eyes suddenly widened, and he pointed his left hand in the air. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of thunder that shook heaven and earth instantly rang out. At the same time, lightning that covered the sky appeared out of thin air and struck the 100,000 soldiers who were charging towards Yi Chun. Boom, boom, boom. A series of explosions followed closely behind. The 100,000 soldiers, who had been full of killing intent and fighting spirit a moment ago, were all struck by the lightning without exception. Broken limbs and charred flesh were everywhere. The players who were imprisoned by Yi Chun saw this, and their pupils constricted. Then they shuddered. Yi Chun was very strong. This was a well-known fact among the players. However, hearsay was hearsay. It wasn't as shocking as seeing it with their own eyes. The players who were imprisoned by Yi Chun were completely shocked by the scene of 100,000 lightning bolts falling from the sky with a casual tap of Yi Chun's hand. At this moment, a strong sense of fear involuntarily appeared in this player's heart. There was nothing he could do. He knew very well that his boss, Qian Duo, was scheming against Yi Chun. And now, Yi Chun had come all the way here and started a massacre. It was obvious that he had no intention of letting anyone go. How could the players who noticed this not be afraid? How could they not be terrified? Yi Chun curled his lips in disdain as he looked at the ground littered with chunks of flesh and severed limbs. He then looked at the shackled player, whose face was already pale, and asked, "What are you waiting for? Tell me where Qian Duo is." Qian Duo was a very famous second-hand dealer in Yi Chun's previous life. As long as he could make money, no matter what it was, he would resell it. In the beginning, Qian Duo only did small business. Later on, when the players ascended to the Primordial world, Qian Duo expanded his business to the liches and demons. Of course, Qian Duo's trading partners were all players. But because of this, Qian Duo made a name for himself because of his bravery. However, in this life, Qian Duo wasn't so lucky. He was chosen by Lu Buwei and was possessed by Lu Buwei. Of course, in the beginning, Yi Chun's first reaction when he heard Qian Duo's name was suspicious. After all, from Qian Duo's life experience in his previous life, it wasn't hard to tell that he was a person of great luck. Otherwise, his business as a second-hand dealer wouldn't have been so smooth. If Lu Buwei wanted to possess such a person, the difficulty was not just a little bit. It was because of this that Yi Chun summoned the God Slayer to scare the restrained player and make him say the exact answer again. However, the result was as expected. The boss of the restrained player was indeed the second-hand dealer in his previous life, Qian Duo. As for why Yi Chun was so sure, it was because when this player was speaking, Yi Chun's divine sense had been locked onto him. If he was lying, he wouldn't be able to escape Yi Chun's senses. Of course, this wasn't important. What was important was that Yi Chun quickly asked for Qian Duo's location to prevent him from successfully escaping. As for the reason, it was very simple. The restrained player suddenly came online and ordered the army of 100,000 to rest for 3 days. This was clearly not normal. More accurately speaking, Lu Buwei, or Qian Duo, noticed that the 100-flower wine in Luoyang Imperial Palace and Zhang Li's residence had mysteriously disappeared. Then, based on this, he directly thought of Yi Chun. After all, in the Great Han Empire, only Yi Chun could cause such a huge commotion and not leave any traces behind. As for the reason, it wasn't complicated. The two places where the 100-flower wine was stolen were the Imperial Palace and Zhang Li's residence, both of which weren't any weaker. In such a short period of time, the 100-flower wine was stolen from these two heavily guarded places. This wasn't something an ordinary person or group could do. Therefore, the person who stole the 100-flower wine could only be Yi Chun. This was because in the entire Great Han Empire, only Yi Chun had such strength. After Lu Buwei, or Qian Duo, confirmed that Yi Chun had stolen the 100-flower wine from the Imperial Palace and Zhang Li's residence, he didn't want Yi Chun to find clear evidence. Only then did he order his subordinates, who were the players caught by Yi Chun, to wipe out all the clues that could lead to him. For example, the 100,000 soldiers who had trained hard in the forest but were casually wiped out by Yi Chun were clues that could lead to Qian Duo. Of course, this wasn't important. What was important was that if Yi Chun continued to delay, Qian Duo might sense that something was wrong and directly log off, leaving his headquarters in the real world. Yi Chun didn't know where Qian Duo would go, but Yi Chun was certain that if Qian Duo wanted to escape, he would definitely run far away. This was because Qian Duo was very clear on the consequences of scheming against Yi Chun and then being discovered by Yi Chun. He didn't want to die. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so careful. As soon as Yi Chun finished speaking, the player who had been caught by Yi Chun hastily shouted, "Lord Yu Beach, this lowly one is only doing odd jobs." This lowly one really didn't have a choice. Speak. When Yi Chun heard this, his eyes suddenly opened wide, and he shouted. As soon as Yi Chun finished speaking, the trapped player suddenly shivered. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, a berserk roar could be heard. "Take my hammer." Li Yuanba, who had been sent flying by Yi Chun's slap, rushed over with his swollen face and two large hammers in his hands. When Yi Chun saw this, his face immediately sank. Yi Chun could have easily taken Li Yuanba's life with a single strike, but Yi Chun didn't do so. This was because Yi Chun suspected that this Li Yuanba was the brave and invincible fool of the Sui and Tang dynasties, Li Yuanba. At first glance, it would be a little confusing, but Yi Chun, who had been reborn, didn't have any doubts. This was because Yi Chun knew that there were many secret realms in the Three Kingdoms beginners area. If players could clear the secret realms or complete special quests, they could bring the characters in the secret realms to the Three Kingdoms beginners area. Chapter 826. Damn it. This idiot doesn't know what's good for him. Wait a minute. Holy shit. This bastard is so stupid. Could he really be Li Yuanba? At this thought, Yi Chun's killing intent was instantly retracted by Yi Chun. If this Li Yuanba was really the idiot Li Yuanba from the Sui and Tang dynasties, Yi Chun really didn't want to kill him so casually. The reason was very simple. During the Sui and Tang dynasties, Li Yuanba was the fiercest man in the world. In the Three Kingdoms era, the fiercest man in the Sui and Tang dynasties, Li Yuanba was a proper historical general. Of course, this was only limited to martial arts. After all, during the Sui and Tang dynasties, Li Yuanba wasn't very bright. As for why Yi Chun thought that Li Yuanba might be the fiercest man in the Sui and Tang dynasties, Li Yuanba, it wasn't just because of his stupidity. There was another very important point. That was Li Yuanba, who had been sent flying by Yi Chun with one slap, had the strength of a saint-level general. Without this premise, even if Li Yuanba, who was rushing toward Yi Chun, was stupid, Yi Chun wouldn't have thought of the fiercest man in the Sui and Tang dynasties, Li Yuanba. The moment Yi Chun retracted his killing intent, Li Yuanba, who was holding his twin hammers and whose armor had shattered due to the collision, arrived 10 meters in front of Yi Chun. At this moment, Li Yuanba stomped his feet on the ground. With a bang, Li Yuanba jumped straight up. Then, he raised his twin hammers and jumped toward Yi Chun. In the blink of an eye, Li Yuanba arrived above Yi Chun's head. Then, Li Yuanba raised his twin hammers and smashed them toward Yi Chun's head. Phew! Whoosh! The wind howled, hammering the film. Li Yuanba's attack speed was extremely fast, but no matter how fast it couldn't be faster than Yi Chun, who was already at the crossing calamity stage. However, Yi Chun didn't dodge at all. Instead, he stretched out his left hand and grabbed Li Yuanba's face. Clang! After two loud bangs, the two giant hammers in Li Yuanba's hands instantly smashed onto Yi Chun's head. However, not only was Yi Chun unscathed, he even sent the two giant hammers in Li Yuanba's hands flying. At the same time, Yi Chun's left hand grabbed the face of Li Yuanba, who was stunned because Yi Chun was unharmed. Idiot, if you weren't that guy, you would have died miserably. Yi Chun glared at Li Yuanba fiercely and shouted. After that, he grabbed Li Yuanba's face with his left hand and pressed it against the ground. Bang! There was a loud sound. Li Yuanba, who was shirtless, was instantly pressed to the ground by Yi Chun. Yi Chun glanced at Li Yuanba, whose body was half pressed into the ground. Then, he looked directly at the player who was stunned by Yi Chun's violent actions and asked, "Is this bastard Li Yuanba from the Sui and Tang dynasties?" Yes, it's him. After hearing Yi Chun's question, the player who was imprisoned on the ground immediately came back to his senses and hurriedly nodded. When Yi Chun heard this, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Damn it, it really is that idiot. I wonder if he has acknowledged me as his master. Just as Yi Chun thought of this, the player who was imprisoned on the ground suddenly thought of something and hurriedly said, "Lord Yu of Beach is Li Yuanba, Li Shimon's younger brother." However, his brain isn't very good. Not only does he not have his past memories, but he is also unwilling to acknowledge me as his master. However, he knows how to be grateful. My boss, that bastard Qian Duo gave him food, so he helped Qian Duo do things. By the way, Lord Yu of Beach, Li Yuanba can be taught by delicious food. This little one will use delicious food to teach him that when he sees this little one, he should call me Great General. When Yi Chun heard this, he was slightly stunned. Then his eyes suddenly lit up. Damn, this is a good opportunity. The imprisoned player suddenly said so much because he realized that Yi Chun was interested in Li Yuanba. He wanted to curry favor with Yi Chun and avoid the fate of being killed by Yi Chun. Yi Chun naturally understood this, but he didn't care. This was because Yi Chun only cared about one thing, and that was that Li Yuanba hadn't acknowledged him as his master. Just as Yi Chun thought of this, Li Yuanba, who had been pressed into the ground by Yi Chun, struggled to get out. Then, he looked at Yi Chun and said with a dumbfounded expression, "Why are you so strong? You're even stronger than my master." When Yi Chun heard Li Yuanba's words, he smiled and said, "Because I'm that strong." When Li Yuanba heard this, he scratched his head and said, "I'm not strong enough. I can't beat you. Damn it, if you can beat me, then that's a real ghost." Thinking of this, Yi Chun didn't want to waste any more time. He waved his right hand, and the cauldron of heaven and earth appeared instantly. After glancing at the cauldron of heaven and earth, Yi Chun's left hand grasped the air. A cloud of creation aura instantly appeared and was slapped into Li Yuanba's head by Yi Chun. After touching his head, Li Yuanba was stunned. In the blink of an eye, an aura unique to an epiphany rose from Li Yuanba's body. Yi Chun glanced at Li Yuanba, who was in a state of epiphany. Then, he looked directly at the imprisoned player and said, "Tell me where Li Yuanba is. Tell me where Qian Duo is. I don't want to hear anything unrelated to this." After Yi Chun finished speaking, he raised the Godslayer in his right hand and pointed it directly at the player's heart. When the player heard Yi Chun's question, he wanted to say something like begging for mercy. However, when he saw the Godslayer pointed at his heart, his body involuntarily tensed up. At this moment, a strong sense of fear rose from his heart. He couldn't help but be afraid because he knew very well that the reason Yi Chun could kill people completely in the game world was because of the thick black Godslayer pointed at his heart. Qian Duo is in Luoyang, but he has already gone offline. In the real world, Qian Duo's lair is in Magic City, the City of Hope. After the imprisoned player regained his senses, he shouted without thinking. When Yi Chun heard this, he nodded in satisfaction and withdrew the Godslayer in his right hand. When the imprisoned player saw this, he he was instantly overjoyed. Yi Chen didn't use the Godslayer to kill him, so he didn't have to worry about dying completely. How could he not be happy? However, his happiness didn't last for a second. Yi Chen swung the Godslayer in his right hand again and directly slapped the player's face. At this moment, the imprisoned player's eyes rolled back and he fainted. Yi Chen wanted to kill him, who asked him to follow Qian Duo, who had Lu Buwei's soul. However, Yi Chen couldn't directly make a move yet. This was because Qian Duo had already gone offline. If Yi Chen killed this player now, Qian Duo, who had gone offline, would definitely discover this result immediately and immediately escape. If Qian Duo didn't have any special items like the 10,000-mile teleportation talisman, then it wouldn't be a big deal. Because Qian Duo didn't have a teleportation tool, he couldn't run very far. Therefore, he couldn't even think of escaping Yi Chen's divine sense detection range. Even if Qian Duo entered a secret realm, secret land, or a special area surrounded by a natural formation that couldn't be detected by divine sense, it wouldn't matter. This was because such a special area could only be in or near his lair. This was the case if Qian Duo didn't have a special tool. If Qian Duo had such a tool, then it would be a different story. It had to be known that no matter how large the range of Yi Chen's divine sense was, it couldn't penetrate a secret realm, secret land, or a special area with a natural formation. As long as Qian Duo used a teleportation tool to escape and directly entered a special area far away, then it would be very difficult for Yi Chen to catch Qian Duo again. This was because Yi Chen wanted to investigate one special area after another. Not only would it be a waste of time and effort, but it might also allow Qian Duo to seize the opportunity to escape even further. This way, Yi Chen wouldn't be able to kill Qian Duo again. It was also because of this that Yi Chen didn't directly kill this player who had gone online here. Of course, Yi Chen could only buy a little time by doing this. After all, Qian Duo wouldn't be so stupid as to keep waiting for this player to return and report. However, for Yi Chen, this little bit of time was enough. Chapter 827. Yi Chen glanced at the unconscious player and Li Yuanba, who was in a state of epiphany. Then, with a thought, he went offline. In the real world, Samsara City, the City Lord's mansion. The door of the diamond-level gaming cabin suddenly opened with a creak. In the next second, Yi Chen, who had returned to the real world, stood up from the diamond-level gaming cabin and walked out. At this moment, Flaming Tiger Yilin, who had been guarding Samsara City in the hall, appeared beside Yi Chen in an instant. Then, she looked at Yi Chen and called out, "Brother, I came back this time because I have something to take care of. Don't worry." After hearing Flaming Tiger Yilin's words, Yi Chen smiled and patted Flaming Tiger Yilin's little head. When Flaming Tiger Yilin heard this, she raised her head and gently rubbed her face against Yi Chen's hand. Then, she nodded and replied, "Okay." When Yi Chen heard this, he smiled slightly. Then, with a thought, his primordial spirit moved, and he instantly released his enormous divine sense. After 2 breaths, Yi Chen's eyes suddenly opened. Found it. When he thought of this, Yi Chen's thoughts moved, and the space in front of him instantly distorted. After glancing at the distorted space, Yi Chen stepped into it and disappeared. In the hall of the City Lord's mansion, Shanghai, the City of Hope, the face of a fat young man sitting in the main seat suddenly darkened. He looked directly at the underling at the entrance of the hall and asked, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" "Yes, boss." Brother Dafei is still gasping for breath. Moreover, I pushed Brother Dafei hard, but he didn't go offline. The underling at the entrance of the hall hurriedly nodded and replied. When the plump young man heard this, he suddenly stood up and looked straight at the 5 men in the hall who had been told to go offline. He opened his mouth and shouted, "Hey, I'm sorry. We can't stay here any longer. Do as I told you before and leave immediately. We'll come back when the World War starts." "Boss, did Yi Chen really discover our plan?" A man with 2 scars on his face couldn't help but frown when he heard this. Then, he looked at the fat man and asked, "Dao Ba, when did the boss say anything wrong? Don't look for trouble. We'll do whatever the boss says." A skinny middle-aged man with a sinister appearance coldly snorted when he heard this. You! When the scar man heard this, his eyes narrowed and he shouted in a deep voice. When the fat man heard this, his face immediately darkened, and then he kicked the table in front of him. In the next second, the fat man looked directly at the 5 subordinates in the hall and shouted, "Let's go. Enough. If you still want to live, then do as I say and leave this place immediately. If you don't want to live anymore, then stay. Those who leave and those who are willing to follow me can come back when the World War starts." Also, before the World War starts, whoever wants to die can enter the game when they're asleep. When the 5 men sitting in the hall heard this, they hurriedly stood up and bowed to the fat man. "Yes, boss." When the fat man heard this, his expression immediately softened. In the next second, the fat man waved his right hand, and a jade slip instantly appeared in his right hand. When the 5 men in the hall who had just stood up saw this, they were all stunned. Then, one by one, they took out a jade slip. At this moment, the space in the hall suddenly distorted. Then, they saw a young man step out and appear here. When the fat man and his 5 subordinates, as well as the lackey standing at the entrance of the hall, saw this, their eyes suddenly narrowed. Then they all cried out in alarm. Yi-chun, just as the fat man cried out in alarm and was about to crush the jade slip in his hand, Yi-chun raised his right hand and made a grabbing motion in the air. 6 sharp sounds of something breaking through the air instantly rang out. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 6 jade slips that had just been taken out flew out of the hands of the 6 men and arrived at Yi-chun's side in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the air in the entire hall of the city lord's mansion suddenly tightened. Then, the fat man and his 5 subordinates, as well as the lackey at the entrance of the hall, were all frozen in place. In the next second, everyone in the hall, except for Yi-chun's expression changed. This was because not only were they unable to move, they couldn't even take out the things in their interspatial spaces. Yi-chun glanced at the people frozen in place, then looked straight at the fat man and asked, "Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" The moment Yi-chun finished speaking, the fat man's face immediately darkened. At this moment, the scarred man, who was also frozen, suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Yi-chun, is there some kind of misunderstanding between us?" When Yi-chun heard this, he glanced at the scar-faced man and then swatted at the air with his right hand. Bang, bang, bang. 3 sounds rang out. The scar-faced man and the 2 people beside him were instantly blown apart. At this moment, the sky was filled with pieces of flesh and blood. They exploded and splattered everywhere. A strong smell of blood also drifted through the hall at this moment. Don't kill me. I was wrong. Lord Yu of Beach, spare me." When one of the fat man's subordinates saw this, his face immediately paled. He then hurriedly looked at Yi-chun and shouted in fear. When Yi-chun heard this, he curled his lips in disdain. Then he flicked his fingers, and 3 fireballs appeared in an instant. Then they flew straight towards the 2 subordinates of the fat man and their lackeys who were waiting at the entrance of the hall. Boom, boom, boom. After 3 explosions, the 3 of them were set ablaze by the fireballs and burned to ashes in the blink of an eye. Right at that moment, the plump man suddenly smiled. Then, he looked at Yi-chun and said, "That's right. Lord Yu of Beach, Buwei, admit defeat." Chapter 828. Admit defeat. Hearing this, Yi-chun coldly smiled. Then, he looked at the plump man and asked. The fat man was Qian Duo. Of course, he was also Lu Buwei. Although Yi-chun didn't expect Lu Buwei to admit defeat, Yi-chun wouldn't change his original intention of killing him because of his words. When Lu Buwei heard this, he glanced at Yi-chun and calmly said, "Buwei, you have already lost this round. Why continue to deceive yourself and others?" When Yi-chun heard this, his eyes suddenly narrowed. He then looked at Lu Buwei and asked, "Looks like you still have a backup plan. Lord Ghost King is indeed smart." Originally, Buwei wanted to use it in the future. However, from the looks of it now, Buwei will be killed by Lord Ghost King without using it. Lu Buwei smiled faintly when he heard this, and then calmly replied. Yi Qin's face darkened. Just as Yi Chen was about to attack, the city of hope that Lu Buwei had built started to tremble. At the same time, a mysterious wave rose from the ground and enveloped the entire city of hope. Yi Chen, who had just raised his right hand to summon the Godslayer and wanted to kill Lu Buwei, was instantly confined to his spot by a mysterious force. Yi Chen's eyes widened when he realized this. It was a formation, and a very powerful one at that. Yi Chen didn't hesitate to use the eyes of fire and gold. Yi Chen's eyes suddenly lit up with two balls of fire. Then, two balls of golden light shot out from Yi Chen's eyes. In the next second, dense explosions rang out one after another. Bang, bang, bang. One by one, the buildings in the City of Hope were pierced by the golden light from Yi Chen's eyes of fire and gold. They exploded. Bang, bang, bang. The explosions continued until the golden light from Yi Chen's eyes of fire and gold shot out of the City of Hope and arrived 300 meters away from the City of Hope. It stopped in front of three 10,000-meter-tall bronze men. Yi Chen's eyes narrowed when he saw the three 10,000-meter-tall bronze men. This was the Primordial 12 bronze men. But why were they so big? Yi Chen was just thinking about this when he realized that Lu Buwei, who had activated the City of Hope's defensive formation, was still unable to move, was shocked. How is this possible? Lu Buwei, who should have been able to remove Yi Chen's control and regain his freedom after activating the City of Hope's defensive formation and locking Yi Chen in place, couldn't move at all. This result was not what Lu Buwei wanted to see. Otherwise, his expression would not have changed so drastically after discovering this fact. Lu Buwei regained his composure after trying his best to steady his violently beating heart. In the next second, Lu Buwei looked at Yi Chen and said calmly, "Lord Yu Beach, how about we make a deal?" When Yi Chen heard this, he sneered. He then looked at Lu Buwei and asked, "Why do you have the Qin Emperor's 12 bronze men?" Yi Chen naturally understood why Lu Buwei wanted to make a deal. However, Yi Chen wasn't interested in agreeing to Lu Buwei's request to remove his restraints in exchange for his own freedom. As for the reason, it was simple. Yi Chen had the ability to break the City of Hope's defensive formation. As for why Yi Chen was so sure, it was because of the formation base of the City of Hope's defensive formation. At first glance, it would make one confused, but in reality, it wasn't hard to understand. This was because the formation base of the City of Hope's defensive formation was three of the Primordial 12 bronze men that had suddenly appeared outside the City of Hope. Although Yi Chen didn't know why the Primordial 12 bronze men, which were originally only 30 feet tall, had become 10,000 meters tall, Yi Chen was very clear about one thing. The 10,000-meter tall bronze men were treasures. Moreover, they weren't low-grade treasures, but they weren't Khanate cardinal treasures. Therefore, if Yi Chen wanted to break the formation and remove the restraints on himself, he only needed to get rid of the formation base of the City of Hope's defensive formation. And to get rid of the three great bronze men, which were the formation base, was simply too easy for Yi Chen. He only needed to release the treasure fall coin to do it. It was also because of this that Yi Chen couldn't possibly agree to Lu Buwei's deal proposal. There was no need, and he couldn't do that. This was because Yi Chen had come here to kill Lu Buwei. How would he give him a chance to live? As for Yi Chen, he didn't respond to Lu Buwei's question and directly asked about the Primordial 12 bronze men, because Yi Chen was a little surprised. After all, Yi Chen hadn't thought that Lu Buwei's City of Hope would have three crazy versions of the Primordial 12 bronze men. Moreover, three bronze men could create a very powerful formation. As for whether Lu Buwei would answer, Yi Chen didn't know. However, if he didn't ask, Yi Chen didn't know how long it would take to solve the doubts in his heart. You Lord Beak's eyes are indeed extraordinary. You can even see the 12 bronze men. Lu Buwei's face darkened when he heard this, and he said coldly. When Yi Chen heard this, his eyes squinted as a cold glint flashed across them. A second later, Yi Chen willed a coin with wings to appear at Yi Chen's side. At this moment, Lu Buwei, who had been staring at Yi Chen all this time, paled. How is this possible? Weren't you imprisoned? How can you summon a treasure? After hearing Lu Buwei's panicked words, Yichen curled his lips in disdain and said, "That's right. Imprisoned? My body is indeed imprisoned by the formation. Unfortunately, you've miscalculated one thing." With a thought, the Treasurefall coin's wings trembled before it disappeared in a flash. Oomph, oomph. A second later, the Treasurefall coin appeared above the crazy versions of the 12 bronze men and landed on the head of one of them. The moment the Treasurefall coin touched the head of the 10,000-meter-tall bronze man, an extremely profound energy erupted and exploded 10,000 meters in the air. At this moment, the white clouds 10,000 meters in the air boiled and turned into boiling water that shot out in all directions. A second later, the Treasurefall coin on top of the giant bronze man's head suddenly flapped its wings, and the 10,000-meter-tall bronze man rapidly shrank until it was only the size of a palm. The Treasurefall coin carried it straight to Yichun. At the same time, Yichun, who had been imprisoned in place by the formation formed by the 3 bronze men, regained the ability to move. Although he was still a little stiff, Yichun could at least move. Sensing this, Yichun looked at Lu Buwei with malice in his eyes and then revealed an extremely evil smile. Damn it, I never expected that these pre-Qin 12 copper men would really be a little abnormal. If it wasn't for the primordial violet chi I obtained at Fox Branch Mountain that allowed my primordial spirit to strengthen by an entire 2 realms, I might really have fallen here this time. However, these 3 pre-Qin 12 bronze men belong to me now. Chapter 829. Thinking of this, Yichun raised his eyebrows and grabbed the miniature bronze statue that the Treasurefall coin had brought back. At this moment, the system notification suddenly sounded. Ding! Congratulations to player Yichun for obtaining the pre-Qin 12 bronze statues X1. When the system notification ended, Yichun's lips curled up. The first one, just as Yichun thought of this, he saw that Yichun could not only move, but also grab a bronze statue. Lu Buwei's face paled, and he cried out in shock. How is this possible? The pre-Qin 12 bronze men were forged by the Qin Emperor by fusing the essence of copper from Mount Shoshan into them. How could you control them so easily? When Yichun heard this, his eyes widened. Holy shit, I was wondering why these bronze statues were so abnormal. So they were forged from the essence of Mount Shoshan bronze. Mount Shoshan bronze was an immortal level material. The Yellow Emperor had once used Mount Shoshan bronze to forge a cauldron. The essence of Mount Shoshan bronze was the origin of Mount Shoshan bronze. To be more precise, Mount Shoshan bronze was a product that was continuously derived from the essence of Mount Shoshan bronze over time. In terms of quality, the essence of Mount Shoshan bronze was a bona fide Xiantian material. Of course, in Yichun's previous life, he had only heard of the legend of the essence of Mount Shoshan bronze. He had never seen it with his own eyes. Otherwise, when Yichun saw the 3 10,000-meter-tall bronze statues outside the City of Hope, although he might not have been able to see their true nature, he would have been able to make a pretty good guess. Of course, this wasn't important. What was important was that an important part of the pre-Qin 12 bronze men was the essence of copper from the primordial copper mountain. To Yichun, this fact was no different from an extremely joyous matter, because even if the quality of these pre-Qin 12 bronze statues was poor, they were still Xiantian spirit treasures. They could not be casually destroyed. This way, Yichun could use the innate spirit treasure 12 pre-Qin bronze men without worry. If the pre-Qin 12 bronze men were only fairy weapons, godly weapons, or acquired spiritual treasures, Yichun would still use them after he ascended to the untainted land, but he had to worry about their sturdiness. One should know that there were too many experts in the untainted world. It was too easy for them to destroy immortal weapons and divine weapons. Although acquired spiritual treasures were relatively stronger than immortal artifacts and divine artifacts by dozens or even hundreds of times, there were at least tens of thousands of experts who could destroy them. Yi Chen did not wish to see the pre-Qin 12 bronze men being destroyed by brute force after using them. Then, the city-protecting array formation would be broken. Therefore, Yi Chen was very happy and excited about the fact that the pre-Qin 12 bronze men were Xiantian spirit treasures. He was determined to get them. After all, Xiantian spirit treasures were not as sturdy as fairy weapons, godly weapons, or acquired spiritual treasures. Ordinary Khanate cardinal treasures could not even dream of destroying Khanate spirit treasures. And Khanate cardinal treasures were rare in the untainted land. Otherwise, Yi Chen would not be so happy. As for the place where Yi Chen used the pre-Qin 12 bronze men, it was undoubtedly the reincarnation Immortal City. Yi Chen's reincarnation Immortal City was still not protected by an array formation until now. If Yi Chen could collect all the pre-Qin 12 bronze men, Yi Chen would immediately obtain a super powerful city-protecting array formation. In this way, Yi Chen's reincarnation Immortal City or reincarnation Immortal City would be so strong that even golden immortals would feel powerless or even afraid of it. Damn, who would have thought that chasing Lu Buwei would reap such a huge reward? Not bad, not bad. This offline trip was not in vain, but then again, the Qin First Emperor was really miserable. He was so lucky to have created a Xiantian spirit treasure, but he could not use it. In the end, his country was destroyed. Wait, that's not right. First Mountain Copper Essence was a F** king Xiantian material. Not to mention when Qin Shi Huang was still alive. Even if he hid in the underground palace mystic realm and used a secret technique to become a zombie, his cultivation realm would still be greatly improved. He still wouldn't be able to use the First Mountain Copper Essence as a material to refine the 12 pre-Qin bronze men. It was no wonder that Yi Chen was so suspicious. After all, First Mountain Copper Essence was not some ordinary copper or iron, but a proper Xiantian material. Even golden immortals would not be able to use First Mountain Copper Essence to forge weapons, armor, or anything else, let alone sky immortals. This was because not many people were able to melt the essence of the First Mountain Copper. Otherwise, why would the Yellow Emperor in the legends not use Shoshan copper to cast his cauldron, but use ordinary Shoshan copper? It was because even the Yellow Emperor was helpless against First Mountain Copper Essence. Thinking of this, Yi Chen's eyes widened. Damn, how could Zheng be so lucky? He actually got a flame that could melt First Mountain Copper Essence? No, if Zheng had gotten his hands on this flame, he would have used it on me when we were in the secret realm in the underground palace. Yi Chen immediately frowned when he thought of this. Damn, Zheng unified the world and hid the secret underground palace before the game started. As for the specific process, I really can't figure it out. However, he should have used some kind of flame that could refine the essence of copper from Mount Shoshan. Thinking of this, Yi Chen looked straight at Lu Buwei and asked, how did Zheng get First Mountain Copper Essence? And where did he forge the pre-Qin 12 bronze men? Hearing up to this point, Lu Buwei took a glance at Yi Chen and said, it's merely an opportunity that descended from the heavens. As for where it is, I'm afraid that Lord Ghost King can only go and ask Emperor Qin. That's because all those who knew about it were killed by him. Yi Chen's eyes narrowed at this, and a cold glint flashed across them. In the next second, Yi Chen asked in a deep voice, where are the other 7 pre-Qin 12 bronze men? Yi Chen had already confirmed that the pre-Qin 12 bronze men were Xiantian spirit treasures. In addition, they could create a super powerful formation when combined. Yi Chen could not let go of the other 9 bronze men. Yi Chen only asked about 7 because the other 2 were in the secret vault of the Luoyang Imperial Palace in the game world. Yi Chen did not continue asking Lu Buwei about the location where the Qin Emperor forged the pre-Qin 12 bronze men, because Yi Chen had already guessed the process of the Qin Emperor forging the crazy version of the pre-Qin 12 bronze men. He had also determined the location where the Qin Emperor forged the pre-Qin 12 bronze men. To be more precise, during the period before the game was launched, which was the novice area of the pre-Qin game world, Qin Emperor Zheng found some kind of powerful flame that fell from the sky. He also obtained the copper essence of the first mountain copper that turned into a meteor and fell to the mortal world. Then, the Qin Emperor Yingzheng used these two to forge the pre-Qin 12 bronze men. Although Lu Buwei did not say this explicitly, Lu Buwei did say that it was an opportunity from the heavens. In addition, the beginner's area of the game world was the mortal world. It would not produce extraordinary treasures on its own. It was not difficult to make such a judgment. As for the location where the pre-Qin 12 bronze men were forged, Lu Buwei might not know, but Yi Chun knew very well. The so-called forging location was in the beginner's area of the Three Kingdoms, under the strongest volcano. This was because the flame that could forge the first mountain copper essence was 100% one of the primordial 10 great flames. And in a place with one of the primordial 10 great flames, there would definitely be an everlasting volcano. With this information, Yi Chun did not need to continue asking Lu Buwei. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.